You probably heard about tourism in the Chernobyl exclusion zone. I've been there myself several times, and it's nothing like what you see in games or horror movies. There are no ghosts, mutants, or radioactive anomalies, and death isn't waiting for you at every corner. Actually, I think it's one of the most peaceful and prettiest places on Earth. An example of strength of nature and how it can reverse the damage that we caused it. Thus, when my friend Alexei and I decided to go there, he knew who to contact. He is studying physics right now and he's doing some kind of research on nuclear fallout, and he said that he wanted to get some direct measurements and samples. But we both knew that it's just an excuse to go on an adventure. We visited the old power plant, the abandoned city Pripyat, and the surrounding exclusion zone. It was nice, but I would probably just bore you with more details. That part is not important anyway. We were driving on some dirt roads in a forest east of Pripyat when we found it. An old rusty fence and a chain gate that blocked any further passage. There was a big sign with a radiation hazard symbol and captioned, "Restricted area. Authorized personnel only." There was a pair of massive metal blast doors in the side of an artificially looking hill not too far from behind the fence, with a large white O-13 painted on it and no entry sprayed on top. "What do you think it is?" Alex said. "I don't know. It looks like some kind of bunker," I replied. "And it looks like it had been closed for some time," I added after taking a closer look at the doors. Both halves were welded shut in the center. Alex took his samples and readings, but we were too puzzled to leave just yet. "Do you think we can get in?" I asked. "Well, not this way for sure. Even if it wasn't welded shut, I'm sure we would have no way of unlocking it," Alex replied while examining the massive door. "It looks like an underground bunker. They must have had a way to pump air inside, and I don't think that this is it. There has to be another way to get in," I said. We circled the main entrance to try to find other means of entry. The day was already coming to an end and it was slowly getting darker. As we were searching, a thought crossed my mind. Why did they weld the doors? What's so important inside that they went this far to keep people away? "Look, there's something there." Alex pulled me away from my thoughts. It was a concrete block a couple of meters large with what looked like vents on the sides. As I looked into the vents, I noticed that they were also sealed with heavy-looking steel hatches and no clear way to open them. However, there was also a somewhat smaller door labeled "Service Tunnel" with a large wheel on the outside. "Should I open it?" I asked. "Yeah, I'm really wondering what this is. Anyway, we don't have to go in. At least we'll see if the door works." At first, the wheel wouldn't turn because of all the rust and dirt, but eventually it budged. The door unlocked. I pulled it and slowly started opening. It was very heavy and it took a lot of force. Behind the door, there was a small platform and a tight vertical tunnel with a ladder. What caught my attention was that there was an identical locking mechanism on the inside. That meant that you could lock the door from both sides. But why? We were lucky because if they had locked it from the inside too, there would be no way to get in. I stepped inside and I shined my phone light down the shaft. It wasn't strong enough to hit the bottom. The air was damp and old and there was something that I couldn't identify. A very faint, chemical-like smell. There is no radiation or signs of any other hazards. "You've got to be kidding me. This is so cool. We have to come back here and check it out later," Alex said. I couldn't agree more. It was almost dark now, so we resealed the door and called it a day, but we promised ourselves to return. I immediately tried to do some research when I got home, unfortunately with no success. I even tried to call Pavel, a friend of mine who knew the area better than me. Actually, it was him who had brought me there for the first time. He couldn't help me either, but promised to ask around. I told him about our plan and I asked if he wouldn't go with us, but unfortunately, he was out of the country for a little bit. A week later, we packed our gear and we went on with it. We brought some rope, heavy flashlights, glow sticks, Geiger counters, waterproof protective clothes, an oxygen meter, and a small emergency scuba tank just in case. And yeah, we're not stupid, so we told our relatives and friends about our trip, and when we're expecting to return. We closed the door behind us as we descended down the access shaft. We couldn't know what's down there, and we didn't want to cause a radiation leak or something like that. We eventually dropped down into a concrete tunnel which enclosed the air vents and some smaller pipes. There was obviously no power and thus no lights. It was a good thing that we brought our own. We followed the tunnel and reached another door, but this time it was a regular one, not a heavy bunker type. We went through and entered a room with 4 large air pumps and some electrical equipment and controls. The ventilation shaft split here into 2 larger ones that ran straight into the ground, and 2 smaller ones that went straight across the room where there was another set of doors. Behind the doors, there was a large hall with numerous boxes, crates and other cargo just laying around. There also was a security checkpoint. Behind the checkpoint, we found the main door that we had seen from the outside. Just next to it, there was some heavy lifting equipment. We returned to the checkpoint and took a look at a set of elevators. There is a simple map with a layout of the facility floor by floor. We were on floor 0, the main entry hall. There is another 4 floors below us. Floor 1, offices, security, and recreation. Floor 2, secure laboratories. Floor 3, accelerator, clean room decontamination chamber. Floor 4, experiment site. The map was titled Object 13. It wasn't a military bunker. This was a research site. We took a set of stairs since the elevators were no use without power. An unsettling thought brushed my mind as we were descending. They probably were moving some supplies and then left them there and took the equipment to the main floor. Were they trying to get out? I stepped on another stair step, but something that rolled away under my foot. I lost my balance and I fell on my back. My pack luckily absorbed the impact. I looked under my feet to see what had caused my fall. Empty bullet casings. This wasn't the sole reason why I felt odd about this place. As soon as we got down to level 1, I noticed that every single door was open. Every single one. There is a canteen and a kitchen right at the beginning of a long rectangular corridor. Various offices surrounded the corridor. There was the regular stuff. Paperwork, old computers, personal belongings. All right where they had left it. Did they leave in a hurry? Dimitri! Alex called from the canteen on the opposite side of the corridor. What? Was all I could say when I followed him to the canteen. There was food still neatly set on the table, but it was not spoiled and it wasn't fresh either. But it wasn't decaying like a 30-year-old meal should. How is this possible? I asked. I don't know, maybe it was irradiated or something. But it's not anymore, I checked that. I really don't know, man. He answered, as puzzled as I was. Oh, why didn't we just turn back and leave? Now that I'm writing this, there are so many red flags already. Something really wrong happened down there. But I guess we were just too excited and curious. But it was at this point that my excitement started to fade and it was replaced with an eerie feeling. Nevertheless, we continued and descended down to level 2. The stairwell ended here, and to go deeper, we would have to cross the entire floor to reach another one on the opposite side. There was a security checkpoint and a large blast door that we would have to pass through to reach the labs. Again, every door was wide open. However, the things that people left here weren't neatly placed where they should have been. It was a mess everywhere. There were all kinds of rooms with all kinds of equipment that I didn't understand. Occasionally, there were more empty bullet casings on the ground. There still was the one central rectangular corridor as above, but the rooms around it were like a little maze. Almost at the other side of the floor, we found the head scientist's office. As I said, it was a mess everywhere, but I found a logbook on the desk. There was only a handful of pages and the rest were torn out. October 5th, 1989. Today we successfully managed to translocate several atoms without changes in any physical properties. It's going to be a long road until we can transport solid objects, but we're doing some good work here. January 17th, 1985. We've managed to transport an apple today. However, I couldn't help but notice that the pattern of red and green skin on top was slightly different. But it was still the same apple, with the same structure, shape, everything. We also tried to transport some electronics. They were unharmed and in working order. I think that we still have a lot to perfect and learn about this technology, but we cannot slow down now. The country is relying on us. February 21st, 1985. After the animal trials, we translocated our first human today. He is alive and healthy, a brave hero of our nation. We have proven that this technology works now, but the practicality is still very limited due to the fixed translocation ratio. We still cannot send matter, only exchange the positions of two equally massive objects. I had proposed a new type of device that could possibly achieve one-way translocation of just a single object, but it would need an immense amount of energy. May 1st, 1985. Our superiors accepted my proposal. They are going to build a new, much bigger translocator here, in the power plant, so we can use a nuclear reactor as a direct power source. There is one more thing. We have now translocated dozens of test subjects. Each one is alive and well, but sometimes they are a little bit different. They sometimes claim that various events in the past happened differently than they really did. Sometimes they claim to know people who don't exist. Or more alarming, they know people who they are not supposed to know. Written below it was a note in pencil by hand. Test subject 28 was speaking an unknown language and it couldn't understand any real language after the experiment. There was a lot of missing pages afterwards. April 25th, 1986. We are going to try to change our approach. It's been more than a year and we're still unsuccessful in eliminating the translocation symmetry anomaly. We still don't know what is causing it, but we are not going to make any progress this way. Today, we are going to try to access the conduit reality instead. Even though Unit 2, the one built in the power plant, is still new, we are going to use it for this experiment. Who knows what wonders are waiting for us on the other side? There was one last page in the logbook. On it was just a single phrase written again and again. We let them in. Alex, I think we should go now, I called. Man, come take a look at this, he answered. I stepped out of the lab and back into the hallway. There were clothes all over the corridor. Well, what was left of them. They were torn to shreds. No bodies, no blood. Just strips of cloth and an occasional shoe or a watch. I looked up and I stared down the dark corridor in front of us. I just stood there for a while. A wave of pure, instinctive dread washed over me. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. "Let's just get out of here," Alex said. We turned around and we walked away. Slowly at first, but we quickened our pace. Our footsteps echoed across the underground structure. "I just want to be out of here, man. We shouldn't have done this," Alex said. I didn't tell him about the logbook, but my thoughts were cut short after a sudden realization. His voice didn't echo. It was just our footsteps. And I think he realized it too, because we both stopped and listened. Nothing. Just silence. I stepped forward. I could hear a clack. I took another step. The clack followed again. There was this door just in front of us, and I forced myself to try something. I closed it behind us as we passed it, and we placed a glass beaker that I found on the ground on top. I took a step forward. Silence. It was just an echo after all, I thought. We walked away, carefully at first, but then we once again quickened our pace. We turned around the corner and then it happened. The glass shattered. Someone or something just opened the door. We dropped all of our gear except for our lights and we ran fast as we could. I didn't even know that I could run this fast. I always tried to be a tough guy, but I was never so scared in my life. Our footsteps didn't echo anymore. Or better said, they weren't in sync with ours anymore. Something was running after us. As soon as we reached the security checkpoint, we started closing the door. The sounds were getting closer. The rusty joint of the door squealed in protest, but we pulled with all of our strength. We almost had it closed when we heard a loud, guttural, and unnatural growl. The door slammed shut and I threw the wheel to the lock position. My heart was pounding so hard that it was all I could hear for a while. No, wait, it wasn't my heart. It was that thing pounding on the locked glass door. We were running again. We reached the stairwell and ran up, taking 2 or 3 steps at once. We finally reached the air pump room. The ascent had really exhausted us, and even though I was scared shitless, I felt like I would pass out if I took another step forward. And besides, we liked it down there. Alex sat down and leaned his back on one of the large vertical vents with a bang. But then there was another bang. And another. And I realized something. We liked it down there. But we forgot about the vents. Alex and I looked at each other. Our eyes met, and then the vent burst and he was gone. I only heard him scream as he was dragged back down. I feel terrible for doing this, but I just ran. I climbed the service shaft and I locked the service door shut when I was finally out of this hell. As soon as I had phone service again, my phone started bleeping with loads and loads of missed calls and messages from Pavel. "Hey Dimitri, I found this guy and he says he knows what O-13 is. Please, pick up as soon as you can. He says that it's dangerous and you should stay out of it. The guy is calling me now. He sounds serious. Please call me back at once. I don't know what's going on, but he's going there. Please, I hope you guys get this before you go down. Stay safe, my friend." There was also one message from an unknown number. "Dimitri, this is Anatoly Morez. I know what you found and I'm on my way from Kyiv now. Do not go down there. If you already did and you managed to get out, lock the door that you used to get in and make sure that it stays locked. I will try to call you when I'm here." So here I am, writing this while I wait. I do this to make sure that nobody else repeats our mistake, since I don't know if I'll live long to tell anybody personally. I just can't leave Alex behind. I have to go back. Stupid college kids. What does this sign at the fence say? No entry. What does this here say? He pointed at the text sprayed across the main door. No freaking entry. You think we just put these things up because we don't have anything better to do, like you. You really have nothing else to do but snoop around things that you have no business in. He sighed. Now look what happened. Look what you did. What your awesome idea brought you. Morose yelled at me after I finished explaining what had happened. The first thing he did when he arrived was to check the service tunnel and make sure that it was closed. He didn't even talk to me. He just ran there and made sure that it was sealed and locked. He was an average-looking guy, probably in his mid-50s, but I think people would say that he looked older than he really was. What is this place? I asked. You have no idea, he said, and he stood up and walked to his car. What are you doing? I'm going to save your friend, and you're coming with me. You will do everything exactly as I say and nothing else. Stay quiet. Try not to exhaust yourself. The air is not circulating and you'll burn all your oxygen and suffocate. You will stay tethered to me by this line. He lifted what looked like to be a small retractable winch. When I turn off my light, you will do the same immediately and you won't move. He continued and he pulled out a shotgun from the car's trunk. Are these going to help? I asked. To an extent, but don't use it unless I tell you to. He said and he handed me a pistol. Last thing, do you know how ozone smells? He asked and I nodded. Good. If you smell ozone, run. I started considering whether this was a good idea when he chained and locked the door from the inside with a massive padlock. This is the only way we can keep them from getting out, he said when he noticed that I was watching him. Hell, of course this was a bad idea. The worst one that I'd ever had. So let me rephrase. I was contemplating whether I would ever see that padlock open ever again. Am I not going to get a key? I asked, watching him close it with a loud click. Sorry, I just have one. But don't worry, I'm right here, he said, sliding his hand across the line that we were connected through. The tether reeled back and forth between us as we walked through the service tunnel. The tether gave me some sense of security. I could be sure not to get lost and separated from the only other person nearby. It created a sort of weird rhythm with the diesel fuel that sloshed around in the large canisters that we carried. Our first stop would be the generator room, on the other side of the main entry hall. The generator rattled and hummed as it slowly started spinning up. Did you see it? Morez asked. What? We have some time for talking until it turns on. Did you get a look at what took your friend when it happened? No, I answered. What is this place? I asked again. He stared into the air, sighed and explained. It was originally a military stockpile in the 50s. In the late 70s, it was then repurposed into a research facility. Anything that was too crazy for public to know about, they've done it here. And it was some messed up stuff sometimes. And then they had this project about teleportation. They even rebuilt half of the facility just to house it. And that's when it all went to shit. How do you know all of this? I asked. I used to work here, he said. So what are these things? I asked. They are. He started, but then he brushed off. I don't know. I was just an assistant. Is there somebody that does know? Not anymore. Everyone who knew, well, let's say they never left this place. And how did you get out? The engine clutch engaged with a click and the generator finally came to life. I didn't. I took a sick day when it happened. The lights turned on for a brief moment and then shut down again as the circuit breaker popped. That's okay. We can't spare the power for the lights. We'll need it someplace else. You'll see, Moreau said. Whatever happened here, whatever killed all these people down here, and God knows it, was all connected with the Chernobyl disaster. He wasn't here. He took a sick day. He took a friggin' sick day. Come on, kid, let's go. We were at the lab security checkpoint that me and Alex had closed earlier during our escape. Remember, stay as quiet as you can now, Moreau told me, and we slowly opened the blast door. To our surprise, the light blinded us immediately, something shining right at us. I took a step back while my eyes adjusted to the light, and then I finally saw the source of it. Alexi's flashlight. I went to pick it up, but Moreau quickly stopped me with his arm and pointed into the blackness of the corridor in front of us. For a moment we stood there, silent, and then I thought I heard something in the distance. Moreau immediately turned off his headlamp, and he gestured to me to do the same while he went to crouch in the corner. I followed and I turned off my light too, but we were still lit up. Alex's light was still on, illuminating the room. Moreau quietly cursed, quickly went to grab the flashlight, and then it was dark, completely pitch black. People say that when you're under stress and you lose one of your senses, the other one's heightened to compensate. It's true, or maybe it was just getting closer. It doesn't matter. I heard something drop to the ground with a muffled splat, and then a few irregular footsteps. Not like the footsteps of somebody walking with a pair of shoes. It was like somebody walking barefoot. Flesh on concrete. And they were getting closer. I instinctively grabbed the gun that Morosa gave me, hoping that I wouldn't need to use it. It was now so close that I could hear a slow, raspy breathing. I think I even felt a cold breeze in my face. Inhale and exhale. In and out. I don't want to think about how close it was. And then something slammed into a wall down the way that we had came from, with a crash and the sound of glass and plastic breaking. Whatever thing was there with us turned and quickly followed it. I thought that it was gone and that we were safe. Out of nowhere, suddenly a hand brushed against me. I almost jumped and screamed, but the hand quickly moved and grabbed my mouth, preventing me from making a sound. Another hand grabbed my gun. "It's me. Follow me. Slowly." A voice whispered into my ear. We entered a room on the side and I heard a door close silently. We waited for a while and then we heard our lights turn back on. "Don't ever do that again," I told him. But he wasn't listening. He was looking at the droplets of a thick, black fluid on the floor at the other side of the room. What is that?" I asked. "Blood. At least it was, once." Moroz answered and followed the trail. We traced it across a few rooms until we stopped in a large chemical lab. There was something on the ground, in a puddle of the black liquid. It was Alex's knife. There was some red liquid too. I could tell what it was without a doubt. Fresh blood. A trail of a few droplets went in the opposite direction than the black liquid. "Look, he must have gotten away," I whispered. "I doubt that. If we want to find him, we have to go to level 4. He had just glanced at the knife and then acted like he didn't see anything. "Look, this is his knife. They must have fought here and pointed in the direction where the blood trail went. He must be hurt. That's one more reason for us not to waste time. Let's go. He stepped off back into the central corridor. I wanted to stay and search for Alex, but the tether that connected us wouldn't allow that. So I obliged and I followed. Initially. Morose, please tell me what is going on. How do you know that he's not here? Because I know. Just shut up. We don't have time to argue. We weren't whispering anymore. I'm not going anywhere until you tell me why you are so sure. I insisted. Because he's dead. What? But you said. Come on, let's go. This is not a place where we want to stay. We have to get down to level 4. Morose cut me off. No. I trusted him at first, because he was the only one who could help Alex and I. That was the only thing I focused my mind on. Saving Alex. Only now I was realizing what I had gotten into. How blind and stupid I was. He wasn't just an assistant as he claimed, and we weren't here to save Alex. I started unbuckling my end of the tether. What the hell are you doing? He asked, raising his voice. I'm going out. Give me the key to the padlock, I demanded. No, I can't do that, he said with agitation in his voice. I had no choice. I raised my gun at him. Give me the key, I demanded again. You really think that it would give you a working gun? You're not going anywhere, he said, and he pointed his shotgun at me. I pulled the trigger, but there was only a click. Shit. Why are we here? Why didn't you call your friends, your superiors, or whatever to take care of this, but you have to hold me at gunpoint? Let's say that we don't share the same goals anymore. But I have no doubt, they're coming here, but not with guns. With concrete. They're going to seal this place up for good, and we have to be quick if we want to get out by the time that happens. Why can't you just please let me leave now? I asked, my voice shaking. Because it's a two-man job, he said, and he looked me in the eyes. There are things much more important than you, me, or your friend. I couldn't deny that. Maybe he was right, but I couldn't do this, and I didn't understand anything. Who are you? I asked him, returning his gaze. But then I looked away. Something caught my attention. Movement behind Morose. It was a creature, crawling across the ceiling towards us. Its body vaguely looked like a human, but its skin was pale and stretched tight over its thin bones. Its veins were visible through the skin, filled with the same black fluid we had found earlier. It had no hair and only holes where its nose and ears used to be. Its eyes were bloodshot, locked in a blank stare. We had escaped it before, but our argument had brought it back. It was too late to run now. Morose noticed my stare, but he wasn't fast enough. The creature lunged at him, and at the same time he turned around and he fired a shot, but he missed and the thing had knocked him to the ground. That shot was deafening in such a tight space. I heard only ringing in my ears and my eyes were slightly blinded by the muzzle flash. In the confusion, I turned to run, but I forgot that I was still tethered to Morose. After the line was completely reeled out, it jammed, stopping me right in my track and sending me falling to the ground. I looked back and I saw that the creature was now looking at me. Morose was lying there on the ground. I must have pulled it off of him by yanking on the tether, and now it would come to make sure that it would not happen again. I finally managed to disconnect the tether, and I threw the useless pistol at the creature, hitting its head. It briefly stumbled and I ran to the only place that quickly came to my mind. I barricaded myself in a storage room, adjacent to the large chemical lab, and I blocked the door with a shelf. The creature spent a minute trying to get in, but then it gave up and left, presumably to finish off Morose. And I stayed there, just sitting in the corner, too scared to do anything. I don't know how much time had passed, but it was starting to get hard to breathe. For a time, I thought I would just stay there and end it all, peacefully, instead of a violent death that was likely awaiting for me at the other side of the door. But then I heard a voice call my name. Alex's voice. "Alex, is that you?" I called back. "Oh, thank God, I thought I would die here. You came back," he answered. I went to open the door, but then I changed my mind. "How did you find me?" I asked. "I was hiding too, but then I heard gunshots, and I came here to look. Dimitri, please come out. We have to get out of here." I sat down again. Maybe it was really him. But what if it wasn't? I did not want to find out. "No, he said that you were dead, and I saw blood too. No, it isn't you. It can't be." "What? What are you talking about, Dimitri? One of those things got me pretty good, but I'm alive still. Dimitri, just please come out and let's get out of here," he pleaded. I have decided I would not open the door, but then I changed my mind once again after what he had said. "Dimitri, do you remember the cherry tree? I knew you would come back. We used to play at this huge cherry tree when we were kids, and we used to climb it all the time, but one day, I had this idea to make a bet. Whoever gets the highest wins. I got almost to the top, but then I realized how bad of an idea this was. The branches under me were too thin, and I knew that they could break under my weight at any time. But Alex did not want to lose. He tried to climb even higher than me, and then the twig he was standing on broke and he fell. Luckily, he landed in a pile of fallen leaves and only broke his leg. He could have killed himself if he had fallen onto solid ground, and it was my fault. I had almost got him killed because of a stupid bet. We decided not to tell anybody how it happened, because we were both afraid of getting into trouble, but I felt guilty about it for the rest of my life. There is no way that he could know about the cherry tree if it wasn't him. I opened the door and there he was. He looked terrible, bruises and scrapes all over, and he had a blood-stained torn piece of shirt wrapped around his left hand. "Are you okay?" I asked. "I've been better. Let's just get out of here," he replied. "That's not going to be that easy," I said. I told him what had happened until now and that the door was locked. Only Morose had the key and he was either dead or gone. "There were some tools and supplies up there, right? Maybe we could find something to cut the chain," Alex said, and we decided to try it. It was better than searching for Morose's key after all. We found his shotgun stained with blood, both his and the creature's, and immediately felt safer. We also picked up our packs that we had dropped earlier. Luckily, all of our gear was still there. We carefully walked back to the main hall, but I felt that something was watching us all along. We saw a few old saws and files next to the main door. We grabbed all that we could, but we weren't alone. The inhabitants finally decided to make their move. One of the thin creatures crawled out of the stairwell. I aimed and fired. It fell down from the ceiling, twitching like a dying insect, but it didn't matter because it was not alone. Another one crawled out, and then another and another. We ran to the air pump room and blocked the door by jamming a large saw between the handles. We worked quick, because we knew that it was only a matter of time until they got through, or they would come through the vents again. Alex was not able to operate the shotgun with his hurt hand, so he offered to do the cutting while I stood guard, ready to kill anything that would come out of the vents. It was working, but it was going way too slow. Alex barely got through a few millimeters when I thought that the door would break already. They were pounding on it, slamming into it, and I saw it rattle in its hinges. I thought that they would get through at any moment, and then they stopped. I heard them run away. I coughed when a sharp odor hit my nose. "What is that?" Alex asked. "Ozone," I answered. "Oh no, no, no," I said anxiously. I immediately realized that the odor was very similar to what we had noticed when we entered the bunker for the first time, only much, much stronger now. My Geiger counter started clicking too. "What's going on?" asked Alex. "That guy Morose, he told me about this. He told me to run," I said. Just as I finished, the door shook in an enormous slam, sending dust flying in the air and slightly bending outwards. There was nowhere to run. We had a heavy steel door on one side, and God knows what on the other. I had no idea how we could survive. Luckily, Alex had. "Do you still have the rope?" he asked. Without hesitation, we tied it around one of the pumps. It wasn't easy at first, working with the rope with my hand shaking violently. But then another loud slam echoed through the room. One of the bolts that held the door was launched across the room. I felt a wave of cold run down my spine, and suddenly, I had just this one purpose: to tie the knot. Everything else just shut down in my head. I was done, and we dropped it down the broken vent that Alex got dragged into before. We stepped inside and we started sliding down the rope. I then heard another slam and then what I think was the door hitting the ground. It was through. I slid faster, but the rope was starting to burn my hand. I lost the grip and I fell down a few meters, landing on top of another vent. It broke and I fell through and sat into the corridor. Alex then landed on top of me. It took us a few moments to get back on our feet. I looked around and I saw an orange door titled Decontamination. We were on level 3 now. There was no handle, only a button on the wall next to it. I pressed it and the door opened after a few seconds. We entered a small room with a control panel. Using it, I closed the door behind us. Several jets then blasted us with air. A green light popped up every now and then. Another door in front of us opened, inviting us deeper into the facility. I noticed that the control panel was stained with a smudge of fresh blood. Was Morose still alive, and had he went through here? We couldn't go back. Our only option was to see how deep the rabbit hole goes. It was supposed to be a clean room, but the place was wrecked even more than the upper levels. After some walking and searching, we found a room that looked like a makeshift infirmary. A few dozens of beds separated with plastic curtains and some medical equipment. Some beds still had clipboards with patient information attached. Patient 2. Quarantine. Survey Team C. Patient in coma. Observation only. Do not interfere. Deceased. 728. Unknown. Patient 6. Quarantine. Survey Team C. Patient in coma. Observation only. Do not interfere. Deceased. 752. Unknown. Patient 19. Quarantine. On-site operative assistant. First contact with Survey Team C. Massive blunt force trauma. Chest. Suspected internal damage. Cranial concussion. Suspected damage to cervical spine. Dislocated left shoulder. Fractured left humerus. Multiple lacerations on the chest. Deceased. 404. Internal hemorrhage. Patient 7. Quarantine. Survey Team C. Patient is psychotic and unresponsive. Mild to moderate frostbite. Observation only. Do not interfere. Termination order. Signed, A. Morose. There were some body bags on the other side of the room. Empty. We searched the area and eventually ended up in the lower levels of the facility. There was this rotten smell all around. We entered a room and well, there is this substance everywhere. On the walls, floor, ceiling, everywhere. It was like flesh with tendrils or veins running across it, like from the Dead Space game. And then we found bodies attached to it. Dozens, shriveled up like dead insects in a spiderweb. I think we should go back, Alex said anxiously. We turned around and went back, but then I heard some debris shift in the distance in the corridor that we had came from. Soon enough, one of these things crawled into the light emitted by my flashlight. It stood there for a while, staring at us with its blank eyes. And then it leaped forward. And then it fell to the ground dead. An empty shotgun shell did too soon after. I heard more of them making their way towards us in the distance, so we ran deeper into the facility. I shot a few more on the way, but then I ran out of ammo. We eventually found a long, dark tunnel flooded with water. The things were almost on us. I could see them crawl along the walls behind us. We entered the tunnel. The water slowed us down considerably, and I awaited the worst. But then I noticed that we weren't being followed. They wouldn't go inside of the tunnel. We walked for, I don't know, an hour, maybe 2. The water was ice cold. Luckily, it was only about knee deep, so it wasn't too terrible. I already said that Alex didn't look so well when I had found him, but as we walked through, he seemed to be getting worse. He complained that his head hurt and that he felt dizzy. His skin got pale and he looked very weak. After some time, I had to support him, and later, he completely collapsed and fell unconscious. We couldn't go back, so my only option was to find a way to drag him through the water. It went like this for some time, but then I heard something far away in the direction that we came from. A splash. I turned and I shined my light into the black tunnel. Nothing. I went to continue walking, but then I heard it again. Hello? I called, hoping to hear an answer. Maybe Morose was here, or did the creatures follow us in after all? Nothing. I quickened my pace, but it wasn't easy dragging another person and moving through knee-deep water. The sounds continued. They weren't getting closer or farther, they were just there. And then I reached the end. The tunnel was closed off with another massive steel door, and there was no visible way to open it. It was a dead end. I stopped moving and I listened. Those sounds, it wasn't just a splash. It was more like as if someone or something was wading through the water. I panicked and I started banging on the door, calling for help. I had nowhere to go. The sounds were now getting closer. I saw waves in the water. It was now very close. I slowly turned again and I looked into the tunnel. I saw nothing and I heard nothing. Just silence and darkness. And then the familiar scent hit my nose. Ozone. And then I heard metal shift behind me and the door opened. Dimitri! A familiar voice called. Morose. What? Who is... No, you brought it here. He pulled me and Alex through the door and then shut it again as fast as he could. That's your friend? How? What happened to him? he asked as he looked at the still unconscious Alex. I don't know, are you okay? I asked back. He had a large gash across his face and his right eye. Well, no, thanks to you, he responded. He noticed the makeshift bandage on Alex's arm and he unwrapped it. What he had on his arm wasn't just a regular wound. It was a bite mark. That, Moreau said and pointed at it. Stand back. He stood up and he drew on his pistol. No, wait! At least tell me what's going on. He's going to be dead in a few minutes. This will make it easier. What? Please? Is there really nothing else that we can do? I pleaded. He looked at me, looked at Alex, and then stood there, thinking for a moment. I was immediately relieved when he holstered his gun again. Okay, this might help him, he said, and he dug up a case with a syringe from his backpack. It looked used recently and it was only about half full with a clear liquid. He injected Alex with the rest of it. It won't matter anyway, he said. What do you mean? Follow me. Take him too if you want. I'm not carrying him. I guess you probably already figured out that this all had something to do with the disaster 30 years ago, he explained as we moved through the facility. The first machine we used for the teleportation experiment, it wasn't powerful or reliable enough. We figured out that this whole thing wasn't as simple as it seemed. We weren't just teleporting one thing to a different place. We were transferring them between multiple parallel realities. But it was limited. We could only exchange two objects with equal mass between two identical places in two different realities. So, they built a new machine here, and they used a nuclear reactor to power it, hoping that we could possibly move anything to any place between two given realities. We started exploring whole new universes, saw worlds where the Germans won World War II, worlds where we all destroyed each other, even worlds where life never evolved on Earth. But then somebody had this idea. If there are these parallel universes, what is between them? And there was only one way to find out. And that's when it all went wrong. As I said, we should have been happy with what we had. But we always want more, right? We tried to access this conduit reality as we called it. But when they activated the machine, it stayed open. Something happened and a portal was created, independent from our machine. It was sustaining itself. So, we sent a survey team in there. They came back after a few minutes, reporting all sorts of strange things, about how a strange feeling filled that place, how space and time themselves felt odd, and even how some of them claimed to have seen themselves at different places at once. They wouldn't go back, even if threatened with all sorts of penalties. We sent a second survey team later. This one didn't come back at all, so we sent a third team to find them. They came back, but something wasn't right with them when they returned. Their minds were like erased. I pictured the blank stares of the creatures we fought on the way. Shortly after they returned, a massive burst of energy flowed out from the portal straight up, right into the reactor. But that wasn't all. And you know all of this because you took a sick day, right? I asked. I was at a different place in the facility when it happened. I'll never forget when they came to me saying that something came through, something into our world. What was it? I asked. I don't know. Nobody knows. It was unlike anything that we've ever seen, and it killed almost everybody here. Not just killed. It did stuff to people. You've seen it. We're here. We entered a control room filled with computers and various controls and displays. Moreau's closed another blast door and sealed us from inside the control room. We need to close the portal. We have tried it before, but these things wouldn't let us. So where are they now? As soon as I heard that you went inside the facility and came back, I knew that something was off. This place used to be full of them. At least one is still here. The smell of ozone. But a few years ago, anybody that went in wouldn't get past level 1. But we've got this far and I don't know why. And that's what scares me. Something isn't right. I know that I'm asking a lot, but we need to go inside the portal and use this. He emptied his backpack and took out a crude-looking contraption with all sorts of wires, coils, and other bits hanging from it. We need to place one end in the other reality, and then return with the second end into ours. If it works, it might cause the portal to collapse. And how do you know that the same thing that happened to the third team won't happen to us too? I asked. That's the thing. I don't. But I'll tell you this. You know how they built that concrete shield over the reactor. They weren't trying to seal the reactor. They were trying to seal this place, to prevent whatever came into our world from getting out. And a few years ago, the thing we feared most happened. The shield started cracking. They were trying to get out. And so they built a new containment building recently, as you know. But for how long will this go on? Sooner or later, something will fail and they will get out. This might be our only chance to end this for good. How the hell did I get into this? I thought. I was just a random guy at the wrong place in the wrong time. But Morose was talking to me as if the fate of the world depended on me. But maybe he was right. Whatever set of coincidences had brought us here, brought me here. Maybe me and Morose were the only people who could do what needed to be done. Alright, let's do it, I said. We put on a pair of what looked like modified spacesuits, left everything other than the device in the control room, and we entered the machine. We were in a dome-shaped chamber full with complicated machinery. In the center, there is a spear of white light. Above it, a black hollow shaft going straight up with cracks and debris around the opening. We tethered ourselves to a steel rail and Morose walked forward, into the spear and vanished. After some hesitation, I did the same. I found myself in a place that I can't describe. There was no up or down and I could walk in any direction. It looked empty. Yet I could still see countless infinity-large shapes with billions of tiny shiny dots on the surface. Here, a voice called. I looked for Morose, but I couldn't find him. Where are you? I called. Come, he said, and he grabbed me by the arm, seemingly out of nowhere. I noticed hundreds of thousands of white spears in the distance around us. Are those? Yes, portals from other parallel realities. Are we going to close them all? No, just ours. The others are not our problem. They will have to find their own way to handle it. We walked towards one distinct shape. As with everything here, I struggle to describe it. It was like a fractal, the same shape repeating over and over and over again. I think this is it, Morose said, and he started doing something with the device. It beeped several times and then started making a high-pitched hum. Oh no, this isn't good, he continued. What's going on? Listen, I need you to take the other end and return. Once you're back, pull this switch and keep this button pressed until it activates. I have to stay here. I picked up my end of the machine, and I watched as a wire started unreeling between the two. What about the key to the door out? I asked. There is no key. What? But you said that wasn't the plan. This was always the plan. I couldn't risk. He didn't finish. I saw something in the corner of my eye. Movement. Shit, don't look at it. Go, now, run! Morose said, and I listened. I ran back. I followed the line back into our portal, with my eyes almost closed. I went through, placed the device on the ground, flipped the switch, and the device started producing a similar high-pitched noise. I pushed the button. For a second or two, nothing happened. And then suddenly the device, or the portal, let out an ear-piercing whine, and an intense flash and a wave of heat. And then it was gone. Severed wires and tether line laid there on the ground where the portal used to be. In the meantime, Alex woke up. He looked much better, and I told him what happened while he was out. We didn't know what to do now. We thought about going back and trying to cut the chain to the door outside again, but after what happened last time, we doubted that it would work. We probably wouldn't get out of here alive at all. But then Alex had this idea. What if we can use the machine to teleport us out of here? It took us several hours to figure out how the controls worked. It was heavily damaged and the reactor was obviously out of the question, but the generators above supplied enough power for a simple translocation as they described it. All we needed to do was input a target vector. And then that familiar clicking and smell of ozone came. A powerful slam shook the whole room and left a large dent in the steel door that connected the control room with the rest of the facility. Shit, not again, I yelled. I think I got it. They have some vectors written down here. We just need to add some height and we'll be above ground, Alex explained. Make it fast, I said as the door shook again with another slam. He did something and the controls lit up with alarms sounding. We ran to the core chamber and closed it behind us, just as we heard the control room door give way. We stood in the center and we waited. Sparks and smoke filled the room as the machine did its thing. Please work. I heard another slam and the door to the chamber broke off the wall and fell to the ground. I looked over and then time froze. I didn't feel fear. I felt at peace. I felt as I was just a step away from understanding everything. I wanted to stay here forever. A flash suddenly blinded me and then I bumped my head into something. I opened my eyes and I breathed in fresh air. We were laying upside down in a crater-like hole in the ground in a forest. We were out. We found our car after a few minutes. We saw several military helicopters fly in the opposite direction as we drove home. Alex checked in a hospital with a made-up story of an animal attack. He was okay in the end, and we didn't talk about it again. It was over and I thought that our world was safe from whatever stayed at the other side of the portal. But when I finally returned home that day, I noticed that something wasn't right. The old cherry tree that we used to play at when we were kids, it wasn't there. There was an apple tree instead. We've managed to transport an apple today. However, I couldn't help but notice that the pattern of red and green skin on top was slightly different. We were transferring them between multiple parallel realities. Portals from other parallel realities. Are we going to close them all? No, just ours. The others are not our problem. They will have to find their own way to handle it. I think I'm not in the reality that I lived in before. I think that when we teleported out, we ended up in a different one. I can't stop thinking that the portal in this one might still be open. I think we aren't safe. The area where we were heading in Eastern Europe was known for its radioactivity. We had received reports of strange animals, things that looked like they were hatched from a mad scientist laboratory. I didn't know how much of it I believed, because some of the descriptions the survivors gave sounded more like Wendigo and Dogmen than any real animal. I figured that in the heat of the moment and under attack, their minds had likely twisted the true form of the animals, as horrifying as they were, into something truly nightmarish. There were 3 of us heading into the dark Eastern European forests. My friend Dimitri, who was originally from the country and knew the language, his girlfriend Anna, and myself. Everything seemed mundane enough as we flew into the country and handed over our passports. There was no sign of the terrors waiting ahead. The first towns that we had encountered looked idyllic enough as we drove through them in a rental car. Isolated farmhouses with cows and chickens dotted the landscape. Plentiful fields of wheat, potatoes, and corn stretched out on all sides of us. The black earth here was fertile, I knew. As we headed deeper into the radiation zone, however, the houses and farms all started to look abandoned and dilapidated, the fields barren and dead. Christ on a cracker, I muttered, more to myself than to my friends. This place looks like it suffered through the apocalypse. It did, Dimitri said grimly. A nuclear apocalypse. I feel like the biblical one is far more optimistic than the true apocalypse will be. In reality, there is no rapture, no victory of light over darkness. If there ever is a World War III, every major city will be consumed by nuclear fire. It will throw buses and cars thousands of feet into the air, spilling out bodies onto the burning skies. Entire streets will collapse, trapping countless millions under the rubble. Well, that's a cheerful thought, Anna commented, her dark blue eyes staring out the window. I saw the reflection of white eyes skittering through the brush outside, small animals that disappeared in front of the approaching roar of the engine. How far is it? I asked, feeling car-sick and anxious. The winding roads here curved through countless hills. It reminded me of driving through parts of Northern California before, when I had retched out the window. Anna and Dimitri seemed unaffected though. I cursed my stomach, which was always turning traitorous towards me. It's a while, man, Dimitri said. This country is huge. Probably another 3 or 4 hour drive, and then we have to start walking. A good thing we left before dawn, Anna said, stifling a yawn. She had a can of some cheap Russian Red Bull knockoff, some fluorescent green crap that smelled like chemicals. But she drank it as if it were the finest French wine. I gazed out at the dark forest that passed us on both sides, wondering what kind of sights lay ahead in this land of the forgotten. The sun rose early over the gently rolling hills and black earth of Ukraine, sending its rusty streaks of blood across the sky. The going had been easy so far, except for the constant car sickness that I felt. I took a few pills, wishing that I could have smuggled some weed gummies through customs. But here, cannabis was illegal and I wasn't eager to see the inside of an Eastern European prison, where lunatics like the 3 Guys 1 Hammer maniacs and the chessboard killer live in horrible conditions. Would you look at that? Dimitri said with awe and wonder oozing from his voice as the car braked abruptly. I looked up quickly, my stomach doing flips. But what I saw laying across the road instantly brought me back to the moment. Dimitri pointed a tattooed hand at the sight. Is that real? Anna asked. I could only shake my head as we all stared at the dead bear that was laying across the cracked road, its dead eyes staring straight through us. I noticed immediately that the bear had extra paws on its arms. Blood-stained claws jutted sharply out of its 4 paws, each seeming to have 7 fingers. Its feet looked stunted and twisted, like the roots of a tree. An extra arm stuck out of the front of its chest, a pale white fleshy growth emerging from its sternum. The mutated limb looked malformed and boneless, causing a sense of revulsion to rise up as I gazed on it. It flopped gently in the heavy wind that swirled down the surrounding hills. Well, I guess the rumors are true, Dimitri said slowly, his eyes as wide and excited as a child. Can you imagine what other kind of things must be lurking in these forests? This is going to make a really awesome documentary. Anna nodded, playing with the small handheld digital camera that she took everywhere with her. She wanted to make a video that would finally go viral on the internet and help her gain some recognition for her work. "I'm going to record everything, including this," she said excitedly, brushing a lock of blonde hair behind her ear as she opened the door of the car. Dawn had risen overhead, radiating the first warm rays of a bright summer day. After a long moment, I followed her out. Dmitri stood at her side, his dark eyes wide. He ran a trembling hand over his shaved head as he looked down at the enormous bear. Anna zoomed in with the camera, kneeling down before the still beast. Her finely formed fingers shook with excitement as she drew within inches of the corpse. I wondered how the bear had died, as I didn't see any signs of injuries on the creature's body. The next moment, I saw it blink. I backpedaled away, giving a hoarse, guttural shout of warning. Anna was busy staring at the screen of the digital camera, scanning it across the bear's extra fingers and limbs. But the panic that swept over Dmitri's face showed me that he too had seen it. He grabbed Anna's arm, dragging her back with a sudden fury. She stumbled, her legs crossing under her. She crashed into him and they fell back together. A moment later, the bear came to life, its bones cracking as it twisted its head to look at the three of us. It swiped a mutated paw at the place where Anna's face had been only a moment before. I heard the sharp claws slice through the air like switchblades. The bear's head ratcheted over to glare at us. It gnashed its teeth as silver streams of saliva flew from its shaking head. With a primal roar, it leapt off the ground. I turned to run back to the safety of the car, but I nearly tripped when a pale figure streaked out of the forest right in front of me. It looked like something conjured up in a nightmare. It was naked and bloated, its skin white with bulging pink cheeks. It looked to have a combination of human and pig features, and yet it ran upright like a person. Its irises were blood red and its pupils were huge and excited. Its beady eyes flickered over to Anna, and a low, satisfied growl erupted from its wide throat. I watched the muscles work furiously in its porcine body as it sprinted towards her. Before either Dmitri or I could react, the pig thing grabbed Anna around the neck, its sharp, black fingers digging deeply into her skin. She squealed like a strangled rabbit as it dragged her away into the dark forest. Its pink lips pulled back in an excited grimace, revealing the sharp fangs underneath. I could hear its growls fade away rapidly. It sprinted much faster than a person, its hooves slamming the ground over and over at a superhuman speed. "Hey!" Dmitri called out, taking a step forward. "What are you?" A giant bear paw with too many gleaming claws smacked his leg out from under him, sending him flying. I only stood there, shell-shocked, as Anna disappeared into the trees. A single moment later, the bear rose to its full height, roaring at us. Streams of spit flew from its mouth as its rancid breath washed over us, breath that emanated a smell like roadkill and infection. I put my hands up, flinching, expecting a blow that never came. When I looked up, the bear had gone back on all fours. It ran in the path the pig-like creature had gone, its white, boneless extra limb hanging limply from its chest. "What the heck?" Dmitri cried in the ground, rocking back and forth. I came back to life, running over to his side. I saw deep gouge marks sliced through his blue jeans. Bright streams of blood lazily dripped from the claw marks on his left leg. "We need to get help," I cried, shaking him. His eyes looked far away and confused, as if he didn't fully realize what was happening. "We need to go back and get the police." "The police?" he asked, laughing. "The police here won't do anything. You think they're going to travel out into the radioactivity zone just for a missing person?" He shook his head grimly before reaching out a hand to me. "Help me up. There's a first aid kit in the car. We need to bandage this up and then we're going after Anna." We had no way to call for help. The phones this far out in Chernobyl didn't work, and there were never any cell phone towers built in the silent land. After Dmitri had disinfected and bandaged up his legs, he rummaged through the trunk looking for any weapons. There's nothing good here," he said despondently. "Some bear mace, some knives. What good is any of that going to do against these mutated monsters? We need an AK." I nodded in agreement. "Too bad we're not in the US," I said. "The only guns you're going to get around here are the ones you'd take off the bodies of Russian soldiers." "Yeah, if only," he muttered sadly, handing me a large folding knife. "We have 1 canister of bear mace, 3 knives, and a tire iron. Not exactly an arsenal." I really didn't want to go into those dark woods, but thinking of what could be happening to Anna made me feel sick and weak. I shook my head, mentally torn. "Here, take the bear mace too. I'll take the tire iron and knife," he continued, forcing the black canister into my numb fingers. "You ready for this?" "Absolutely not. I think we should try to find help. If we both go out there and get slaughtered, nobody will ever find Anna anyway." "Well, the nearest town is 2 hours west of here. By the time we get help, her trail will have gone cold. It will take at least 5 or 6 hours to get any rescue out here. No, we need to do this, and we need to do it now. If you don't want to come..." "I'll come," I said grimly, my heart pounding. "Screw it." Dmitri had a sad history. As a child living in Ukraine, he had been kidnapped by an insane neighbor and kept in a dirt pit outside for weeks, wallowing in his own waste and slowly starving. He said that the man would throw down a stale crust of bread or a rice cake into the mud every couple of days. Dmitri would pull the food out, wipe off the mess, and then eat it. I shuddered, remembering the horror stories that he had told me. I knew that he had a personal reason for making sure that Anna was not subjected to the same endless suffering, even if it meant his own death. The bear and the pig creature had left a clear trail of broken brush and snapped twigs snaking through the forest. Side by side, we moved cautiously ahead, constantly checking our backsides, but we saw no signs of movement and heard nothing. Up ahead, the trees abruptly opened up, letting golden sunlight stream down. Blinking quickly, we left the forest behind. We walked out into a field in the middle of a valley surrounded by tall, dark hills. Grass and weeds rippled in waves as the wind swept past us. Formed in a semicircle in front of us, human skeletons lay endlessly dreaming. They stared up into the vast blue sky with grinning skulls and empty sockets. Some still had putrefying strips of flesh and ligaments clinging to the bones. Animals had scattered some of the bodies, but others lay complete, like corpses in a tomb. Human skulls, leg bones, and arm bones lay scattered haphazardly across the field, their surfaces yellowed and cracked with age. It looked like a bone orchard. "What are we looking at right now?" I whispered, furtively glancing around at the field of bones. An insane part of my mind wondered if they might rise from the dead and come after us. Compared to what we had already seen in this place of nightmares, it didn't seem that far-fetched. "Bodies," Dmitri said grimly. "Victims of the nuclear accident?" I asked. He shook his head, pointing at some of the fresher corpses nearby. Their throats looked like they had been ripped out, their bones of their necks showing deep bite marks. The one nearest to us had its skeletal fingers wrapped around a glass bottle, with a piece of paper rolled inside and a cork inserted into the top. I knelt down, prying the fingers back with soft, cracking noises. I uncorked it and took out the paper. It felt thick in my hands like some kind of handcrafted paper from the old days. The cursive flowing across these sheets looked like it had been written in a quill pen with actual ink. In confusion, I read the letter aloud. "Rules to survive the Hellskin Nature Preserve. 1. The cult known as the Golden Butchers have been kidnapping women to breed them with the pig creatures. They worship the offspring that result from these unions as gods. If a member of your group gets taken, you will find them in the living farm at the end of the forest. 2. If you encounter Mr. Welcome, the enormous pig god with the eyes on his forehead, you must not let him touch you. 3. The red snakes can only see you while you're moving. If you encounter them, stay still, don't even breathe. Breeding women with pig creatures. Dmitri cried, horror washing over his face. We need to find her, but where do we even start? I looked through the field, trying to see any sign of tracks, but it looked like hundreds of animals had gone through this field recently. Pathways of tall crushed grass crisscrossed the enormous length of it, some of them worn down to black dirt and stones. I just shook my head, having no idea. A distant scream rolled its way down these surrounding hills. It came from our left and sounded very much like Anna. Dimitri's eyes turned cold. Without looking back at me, he started frantically running towards the sound. It faded away within seconds. "Wait up!" I cried, sprinting as fast as I could. His freshly shaved head gleamed as he disappeared into the trees. And gripping the open buck knife in my hand, my knuckles white with tension and fear, I followed after him. We wandered for hours through the woods, never hearing a second scream to guide our path. We both hoped that we were going in the right direction. A small deer trail winding through the brush opened up, heading up rocky hills and clear streams of water. Sweating and nervous, we traveled for miles and miles, rarely talking. A few times I tried to get Dmitri to slow down. "How do you know you're going in the right direction?" I asked. "We've been walking this trail for 5 hours and haven't seen a thing." "This was the direction the scream came from," he said weakly. "Where else would they go? They would want to travel quickly with a hostage. They would take a trail." I didn't point out that there may be other trails and that we had absolutely no idea where we were going. As we reached the peak of a mountain, I pulled a small portable Geiger counter that we had taken along for the trip. The radioactivity here was high, much higher than normal background radiation. I didn't know how far we were from the nuclear power plant at the center of all of this, but at a certain point it would become too dangerous to keep moving forward. Dmitri was next to me, chugging a bottle of water when a shriek rang out below us. It sounded almost animalistic but had a strange electronic distortion. Amplified to an ear-splitting cacophony, it echoed through the trees. Much quieter roars answered from the forest all around us in response, the cries of bears and other predators. These sounded much closer, however. "Psst," a pile of thick ferns said to my left, shaking suddenly. In Ukrainian, the ferns continued by whispering, "Hey you." I jumped, swinging the knife in the direction of the brush, watching the blade shake wildly in my hands as fresh waves of adrenaline surged through my body. Dmitri was by my side, his eyes wide and wild. He glanced over at me, nodding. He had the tire iron raised like a tennis racket, ready to strike. A moment later, a little boy crawled out. He was scarecrow thin, his face smudged with dirt and filth, his dark eyes sunken and lifeless deep inside his small head. He had black hair and a nose like a little twisted lump in the center of his face. It seemed like it had been repeatedly broken. He didn't look older than 10, but he looked so emaciated that it was impossible to say. The rags and tatters that he wore barely covered his body, and the boy was almost in his Genesis suit. "Come out," I said grimly, and Dimitri's eyes bulged from his head. "Don't kill me, please," the boy whispered in a cracked and choked voice. "Take me out of here. My mom and dad brought me here. They were a part of the Golden Butchers. But a couple of months ago they got sick and died from all the poison in the water and food." "Who are you, kid?" Dmitri said, reaching down and pulling him up to his feet. I watched the boy closely, the bear mace in one hand and the knife in the other, looking for any sign of sudden violence or betrayal. "My name is Philip and I come from the farm," he said, pointing vaguely towards the tallest peak in the area. "You can't see it from here, but it's over there." Dmitri kneeled down until he was eye to eye with Philip. "Can you take us there?" he said. Philip's eyes teared up, but he slowly nodded. "If you will take me with you when you leave, then I'll show you," he said, crying now. "But it's a horrible place. It's the place of Mr. Welcome." Philip guided us to the living farm, saving us a great deal of time. He navigated the forest like an experienced hiker, seeming to know the entire area from the smallest clues. A split, fallen tree, or a tree with a whirl like an eye, or a sudden curve in a babbling brook. It saved us a great deal of time wandering through the woods, where everything looked exactly the same to me. "There," he said, pointing through a break in the trees to the farm. The entire top of the hill was cleared of trees and brush. In its place stood a nightmare. The farm was the closest place to Hades that I've ever seen. The top of the living building peeked over the tall trees surrounding it. It had something like a bell tower on top of it, almost like a church might have. But instead of a bell, it had an enormous bloodshot eye. Its eye had an iris as red as a dismembered heart. Its pupil was dilated and insane. From here, the eye looked to be about the size of a church bell and had no eyelids. Strange white filaments like those of a slime mold surrounded it, trailing down into the building. I wondered if this was the optic nerve for the great staring eye. The rest of the building was as black as eternity, windowless and imposing. It had a brutalist architecture, all sharp angles and steep slopes. I watched the building and the eye closely. To my horror, I realized that the entire thing was alive somehow. The eye constantly spun in its place, staring out over the surrounding hills like the eye of Sauron. The building constantly breathed, "Welcome." A hushed, distorted voice cried. The words seemed to come from the breathing and living walls of the farm itself. "Welcome, welcome." "What the heck is this kid?" Dmitri whispered hoarsely. "Where's Anna at?" Philip shook his head sadly. "She's inside with the other breeders," he said, and the fear and terror became evident on his face. "They keep them chained up or bound in the basement until the time for the ritual comes." "And when is that?" I asked. He looked up at the sky and the fading light. We had somehow wasted nearly an entire day already. Night was coming and we hadn't even seen Anna yet. "At sunset," he responded. Dmitri nearly jumped at that. "A sunset? That's almost here. We need to go now," he cried. I almost wanted to laugh. "What are you going to do, stab that enormous building with your knife?" I whispered. "We need a plan. Maybe we can burn it down or—" But my words were cut off by the roaring of the building. Its screams echoed over the hills, and it was immediately answered by countless others, including one that came only a few dozen feet behind us. I grabbed Dimitri's shoulder, my panicked eyes flicking in that direction. "There's something," I started to say when the brush cracked under a heavy weight. Looking up, I saw something horrible stalking us from behind. It looked like a pig walking on all fours with a fat and bloated body, but it was the size of an SUV. Its eyes were like the eye in the building, blood red and dilated. All over its body, hundreds of sharp teeth grew out of its skin, covering the pink flesh like tumors. The creature almost looked like a porcupine with all the sharp points of fangs projecting from its body. For a moment, its eyes widened as we stared at each other. They instantly narrowed as the pig roared again and gave chase. It gnashed its teeth, opening and closing its mouth in a frenzy of bloodlust. In its mouth, too, the teeth grew wild. Hundreds of razor-sharp teeth of different sizes grew from its gums, tongue, and lips. "Run!" I cried, grabbing Philip's arm and hauling him off the ground. The boy had a natural survivor's instinct and immediately started running by my side, away from the approaching creature. We broke out into the massive clearing where the living farm stood. I saw that the building had only a single door in and out, a black barn door that stood wide open. I heard Dimitri's feet pounding the ground behind me. The heavy thuds of the approaching creature grew louder by the second. "In the barn," I cried, not having time to think. It was the only possible place of safety here. I sprinted faster than I ever had before towards those doors as if they were the entrance to paradise itself. Without slowing, I ran into the building trying to slam one of the doors shut behind me. Dimitri grabbed the other. With the creature only seconds away, they started swinging shut. Philip's small body pressed against my leg as he came forward, using his meager strength to help me. The door was extremely heavy and hard to move. The building itself looked like it was 6 or 7 stories tall, and the doors to the barn nearly a third of that height. With a tortured creak, they slammed shut. A single breath later, something heavy thudded against the other side, as if it had been hit by a battering ram, but the door held. Quickly, Dimitri and I grabbed a large board leaning against the wall and stuffed it into the brackets on both sides of the door, locking it from the inside. I noticed how cool and dark it was in here, as if I had walked into a cave. I turned, taking in the interior of the living farm for the first time. At that moment, I had to repress a scream welling up in my throat. Hundreds of prisoners lined both sides of the barn. They were stacked one on top of another like prison cells. Wearing filthy rags, most of them looked silently down on us with dead and haunted eyes. I noticed the majority were in their 20s or 30s, but their eyes looked centuries old. Along the back wall, an enormous pig lined the wall, positioned like Jesus on the cross. It stood as tall as the barn itself. Extra eyes covered its face, a dozen of them positioned all over its cheeks and forehead. From the top of its head, I saw white filaments rising up into the bell tower. Its many blood-red eyes focused on us as still as death. "Welcome," it hissed. "Welcome." Its limbs were chained to the wall. Enormous rusted links intertwined around its body, preventing Mr. Welcome from moving. "Anna," Dimitri cried, looking around frantically. There was no one else here that I could see except for Mr. Welcome and all the hostages. "Anna, where are you?" "Don't scream," Philip said in a tiny fear-choked voice. "Please don't scream." But it was too late. As Dimitri's last words faded, trapdoors built into the black floor of the barn sprung open. Dozens of mutated bears and pig creatures crept out, their predatory eyes scanning us with hunger and anger. "Crap," Dimitri cried, running back to the door at my side. Frantically, the three of us pulled the board up and dropped it to the fleshy floor with a clatter. As hisses and growls erupted all around us and the predators creeped forward towards us in a semicircle, the barn door flew open. It was nighttime now, and the darkness was creeping in like a descending curtain. No pig creatures awaited us on the other side, but something worse seemed to be creeping out of the forest. I saw snakes the color of clotted blood slithering ahead. Each one was the size of a tractor trailer, yet they made very little noise. An occasional hiss would rip its way through the air, but they hunted silently. As I stood in the field in front of the barn, a no man's land, the certainty of death fell over my heart like grasping skeletal hands. I looked down at the little boy sadly. He gave me a faint smile, even though his eyes were terrified. "I think we're screwed," Dimitri whispered by my side. I only nodded. But at that moment, I remembered the rules and an idea came to me. "Just stay still, don't even breathe." Philip and Dimitri looked at me strangely, and then recognition came over their eyes. Dimitri only nodded, and then we all played statue. The predators from the barn were only 30 feet behind us by now, crouched down and hunting like a cat with a mouse. Yet the snakes also closed in, their black, slitted eyes gleaming with a reptilian coldness. As the mutated bears and pig creatures leaned down to pounce, I closed my eyes waiting for the inevitable. I felt a sudden rush of air all around me. The snakes flitted forward in a blur, their massive jaws unhinging. Two fangs swiveled out like switchblades, fangs big enough to impale a police car. Drops of clear venom fell lazily from the ends. Keeping my eyes closed, afraid to even breathe or blink, I listened as these sounds of tearing flesh and screaming animals resonated all around me. After about 30 seconds of this, everything went deathly silent. I don't know how long we stood there like statues, but eventually somebody touched my shoulder. I opened my eyes, unbelieving, and Dimitri stared at me intently. "They're all gone," he whispered. "All except for Mr. Welcome. It's now or never." I nodded, and together we moved into the farm. The trap doors still lay open, and I could hear very faint sobbing coming from under the building. Dimitri was afraid to make a sound. Together, the three of us went down to investigate. We found a dark basement covered in hay, tools covered the walls, iron maidens, brazen bowls, crosses, and an entire universe of saws, grinders, pliers, razor wire, and other tools of the trade. In the corner, we saw Anna, her hands tied to the wall. More rope bound her feet and legs. We ran forward. When Anna saw Dimitri, she collapsed into a nervous wreck. "Oh my God, you came for me. Please get me out of here right now." "They're coming. The ritual's going to start soon." Without a word, we started cutting the ropes, freeing her quickly. "We need to be as quiet as possible," I told Anna. "We can all get out of here, let's hope." As we ascended from the basement back to the main floor of the living farm, the repetitive, metallic voice of Mr. Welcome kept repeating the same insane mantra. "Welcome. Welcome." Once the four of us were all together, however, it changed. "Welcome, thieves," it hissed, its voice deepening and turning into a demonic gurgle. "That's my breeder. You will have to find out what happens to thieves." I could only imagine all those tools in the basement, and I shuddered. Mr. Welcome inhaled deeply, his massive fleshy body ballooning. With a predatory roar, he ripped the chains out of the wall of the living building. Orange pus and dark clotted blood dripped from the holes. The barn breathed faster and deeper, the broken walls vibrating and shimmering as new life and pain flowed into them. Mr. Welcome started moving towards us like a grinding juggernaut, walking on two legs like some sort of pig god. His many lidless eyes never looked away from us. The frayed optic nerves leading to the bell tower broke with a sound like snapping rubber bands. Dimitri looked at me with great sadness in his eyes. "Get away," he whispered. "All distracted. Just get Anna home no matter what." Before I could respond, he ran forward towards the abomination, the small useless knife raised in one hand. Mr. Welcome saw him coming. He tried to swipe at Dimitri with a sharp black hoof, but Dimitri ducked, running around to the back of him. He gave a battle cry and started stabbing the monster in the back of the leg, which probably hurt it about as much as a toothpick, but it provided a distraction. This time, Mr. Welcome spun his whole body, falling back to all four legs to deal with this nuisance. He used his massive snout to smack Dimitri hard, sending him flying across the barn. He hit the wall with a bone-shattering thud. Dimitri's skin immediately started to blacken as if he were being burned alive. His eyes melted out of his face as he screamed, clawing at the dying patches of tissue spreading across his body. Within a few seconds, his screams faded to agonized groans. He tried to crawl back towards us as he died. "Run!" I screamed, grabbing Anna's hand and forcing her to sprint by my side. Philip was already one step ahead of us, frantically trying to reach the shelter of the forest. I heard the ground shake behind me as Mr. Welcome drew near, moving much faster than we could ever hope to go. I knew that we would never make it. "Keep going no matter what," I yelled at Philip and Anna. They kept running, the animal instinct to survive now foremost in their minds. I had to suppress mine. I turned to face the creature, the evil pig god known as Mr. Welcome. In hindsight, I don't know if God or some divine power had interceded, but the bear mace was probably one of the few items that could have saved us at that moment. Mr. Welcome had many eyes, and now that he was running on all four paws, his face was within reach. As my heart palpitated wildly, I raised the bear mace and sprayed it at his dozen eyes. He didn't slow, and I had to jump to the side to keep from being trampled. The air whooshed past me as if a subway car had gone by. But a moment later, Mr. Welcome gave a roar, and not one of anger or hunger. This was a roar of pain and uncertainty. Blinded, Mr. Welcome frantically started running in circles, knocking down huge swaths of trees. The ear-splitting racket as he pulled the forest apart crashed over the surrounding landscape. Without a moment of hesitation, I turned to follow Philip and Anna back to the car. We told the police about the barn and all the hostages, but they claimed that they couldn't find it, and we never heard anything more about it. Looking back on the experience, I now know why Chernobyl is a restricted zone, and it isn't just because of the radioactivity. There are some things that hide under the surface after all, things that grow in the dark, rotted places where no eyes roam. I can't take it anymore. The past few weeks had been the hardest of my life. All the stories, interviews, the hauntings, these strange things that keep happening. I just want a small break. A few days off of not being stressed, not being agitated all the time. Every time I look at a dark place, I can just feel that something is watching me, staring at me, waiting for me. I've had enough of it. I decided to stop following stories for a few weeks. I was done with interviewing people about their paranormal experiences. I was searching for something that wanted me to find it, and each step I got closer to it, I could feel it becoming more fulfilled. I don't even know what it is, let alone how it looks. I decided to just ignore it for the time being. I deserved to find some rest, but being bound to a small student room, I just couldn't get it. All the time, I'm being surrounded by 4 gray walls. Even my sleep cycle became shorter and shorter. Nightmares that plagued me. Seeing things move in the dark. It doesn't give a person a good night's rest. I grew so tired that eventually I just sat at the chair, staring in the distance while I almost kept falling asleep. I had to do something to keep my mind off, and the only thing they came up with was a thing that I never thought of doing. I went to a pub to drink my sorrows away. It was late in the evening when I arrived. I felt the cold, autumn air filling my lungs, a clear sign that winter was almost upon us. I entered the pub, hearing the bell at the door ring, notifying the barman that someone came in. The first thing that I noticed was the smell of strong beer combined with the old rotting wood in the pub. It wasn't an ideal smell, but the longer you stayed, the more that you could get used to it. At least it was warm in there. Any longer staying in the cold and I would probably get sick. I looked around in the pub. I only saw 2 men sitting apart from each other. It seemed like they had invented drinking in a pub as they were looking at their empty glass with sorrow and despair. I walked to the barman, who was cleaning some of the glasses. It was a tall and strong man, who I believe had all of his hardships already encountered during his lifetime, and now looked like an unemotional and not caring man. I asked him for the strongest drink that he had. He looked at me and went down under the bar, grabbing an unlabeled bottle with a transparent liquid in it. He poured it into a glass and he gave it to me. It smelled like it was pure alcohol. I went to one of the booths somewhere in the back of the pub and just looked at my drink. It felt like I was a part of the other 2 men sitting in the same manner as I was. I sipped my drink and immediately felt it burn my throat. I don't know what the drink was, but it was very, very strong. I sipped from my drink a few times, drinking my thoughts away, until out of nowhere, a strange-looking man came sitting in front of me in the same booth as I was. I looked at the man with confused eyes. I hadn't seen this man before, nor did I see anybody come in the place or heard the bell ring. It looked like a young man, but also very old at the same time. His hair was gray and he had the appearance of a strong but heavy man. He was wearing all white. It was just strange that I didn't notice such a noticeable man before. I looked at him, but he didn't look back. He just stared at his drink. For a moment, I thought he was just copying me and the other two guys in the pub, not talking, just staring at their own despair. And then he suddenly looked up at me, and he raised his glass. "To life," he said in a very heavy accent, "and all the fruits it can give us." I raised my glass as well, and gave a smile to be polite. For a good few minutes, he just stared at me, not saying anything. I just looked down, trying to ignore this man who, for a strange reason, came sitting next to me. He then took a big gulp of his strong drink, all the while keeping his eyes fixated at me. "Where are you from?" he asked me. "From around," I told him. He nodded, still watching me with his cold eyes. "Where are you from?" I asked him, still trying to be polite. "I was born in Russia, but I lived for a long time in Pripyat, Ukraine." I knew that name from somewhere. I had once heard it or read it, but I couldn't really remember what it was. Was it nice there? He looked at me with dreaming eyes as if he was thinking of a better time. "It used to be nice," he said while wondering. "It really felt like home." He took another big gulp from his drink while seeming to think about his hometown. "What's your name?" I asked him, trying to keep the conversation alive with this strange man. "My name is Yuri. It's nice to meet you," he said with a smile. "Nice to meet you, Yuri. My name is..." "No need to tell me your name, young man. We're just having a good time, right?" I looked at him and gave him a crook smile. "Yeah." We both then started to stir at our drinks, not saying anything for a long while. "What do you do for a living?" I asked, breaking the silence between us. "I worked for a long time in a power plant," he stated happily, as if he was very proud of it. And that's when I knew that Pripyat sounded so familiar. "Wait, you didn't work in Chernobyl now, did you?" He took another big gulp of his drink and looked me straight in the eye again. "That's correct. I worked in Chernobyl." I was really surprised and confused. Why in the world was someone like him in a pub like this talking to me? "You're not kidding, right? I'm talking about the Chernobyl," I said, not believing him. "I'm not kidding, my friend. There is only one Chernobyl I know of, and that's where I worked." He grabbed something out of his white pocket, a very old card. He showed it to me, and there I saw that he really was an employee at Chernobyl. It isn't that I couldn't read it. It was all written in Russian, but I could make up the word Chernobyl, and everything else seemed official. "Why are you here?" I asked him, surprised. "Drinking my sorrows away like everyone else," he said in a very Russian way while giving a smile. I laughed and took another sip of my drink. "What kind of work did you do in Chernobyl?" "Well, I worked at the reactor panel. I had to overlook if everything in the reactors were stable." I looked at him, and he saw that I wanted to ask him something very badly. He widened his eyes, making it clear that I could ask the question. "Well, were you there when it all happened?" I asked, hesitant. "Duh," he said quietly while taking another big gulp of his drink. It seemed to bother him a lot. I didn't know if I could ask him more about it or if I should change the subject. I decided on the latter, out of respect for what he had probably been through. But he started to come closer to me. I could smell his breath. It smelled almost like metal. "There are only a few men in the world that know the true story about Chernobyl." "What do you mean?" I asked, intrigued and surprised. Chernobyl wasn't an accident. I couldn't believe my ears. What was he talking about? Chernobyl was an accident. It isn't like somebody would purposefully blow up a nuclear reactor. Yuri saw the confusion on my face. It's true what I'm saying. Chernobyl was not an accident. Someone or something had purposely sabotaged the reactor so it would explode. How do you know that? I asked in wonder. Yuri looked at his glass and drank another big gulp of it. It all started a few days before the disaster of Chernobyl, he said with wrinkles on his forehead. I woke up to another nightmare about something watching me at the end of my bed. It told me to run or die. It caused me to sweat like a pig in the furnace and it made me very nervous. Luckily, my wife could make me feel calm again. You had a wife? I asked curiously. Duh, he said in a very Russian way with eyes of happiness. I had the most beautiful wife in the world. She was the flame that lit my heart and gave me a purpose in life. She too had bad dreams about something watching her. She told me for days that she felt like something horrible was going to happen. Somewhere, I believed her, but I thought she was exaggerating. He looked at me as he was getting closer again. When women say they have a bad feeling, you must believe them. They have, what do you call it? A sixth sense about those things. I laughed as he told me that, thinking he had meant it as a joke, but he was dead serious. It's true. She knew something was wrong. Every time she saw my coworkers, they seemed worried what she said. And she was right too. One of my friends worked close with the chiefs of staff of the power plant. He told me they were concerned about something happening to Reactor 4. They said things about it malfunctioning for no clear reason at all. The reactor became already unstable for a few times, and they needed to stop it from happening again, going on about some safety test of some sort. Why didn't they tell anybody that it was malfunctioning? Yuri took another sip of his drink, which I followed with one of my own. Because Soviet Russia doesn't like to hear about failures, only success. They wanted to keep their jobs, so they tried to fix it themselves, said Yuri while shaking his head. That's sad. Very sad. I took another sip of my drink and reached the bottom of my glass. I asked Yuri if he could wait to tell his story so that I could ask for another drink. I went to the barman and asked if he could give me another one, this time a little less strong. I think you've had more than enough, he said a bit angry. He didn't want to serve me and I had no idea why. I didn't feel drunk, a bit tipsy maybe, but not drunk. I went back to my booth where Yuri was waiting for me. No drink? He asked. No, the barman didn't want to serve me, I said, disappointed. Don't worry, you don't need alcohol to have a fun night. I agreed and went back to sitting in the booth, waiting eagerly for the rest of the story Yuri was about to tell me. Eventually, I noticed, just like my beautiful wife, that something odd was happening around town and near the power plant, he started saying. People were on edge as if something was haunting them, but nobody spoke about it. It was normal to keep your mouth shut, even though more and more people were victim to freaky accidents. Accidents? Duh, accidents. Many people were injured or missing. One night I heard someone scream their lungs out saying that it was following him. We never saw the man again. Did people help him? No, we all thought the KGB was behind these things, but in hindsight, even those suckers didn't know what was happening, as if they would ever admit it. Yuri took another gulp of his drink. It seemed like the drink was never going to go empty. He drank so much, but he never went to the bar for a refill. And then April 25th, 1986 happened. I remember that day as being the strangest of all days. I woke up in the evening with a strange and horrible nightmare. Darkness was following me, and when it engulfed me, it just said, goodbye. I couldn't think much about the nightmare, for I had to start preparing myself for the night shift at the power plant. And to give me some rest before my hard work, I would always walk in a small park near my home. The scenery was beautiful, not like those ugly-looking gray concrete giants everybody lived in. I was almost done with my walk until I encountered the next strange thing. I saw Vidova. Vidova. It means widow lady. We call her Vidova because her husband had killed her 2 children and then ran away only to be found murdered somewhere in the forest. They said an animal had killed him, but the man was clearly being harmed by something much more dangerous. Yuri raised his glass in honor. I did not know if it was for the man or for the thing that had killed him. Vidova became mad after it all happened. Never left her apartment and always had every light on, especially at night. But there she was, watching the trees with tears in her eyes. I asked her what the problem was, and she said she didn't want the leaves to become red. Yuri shook his head again. I thought she was being crazy again. It was spring, not autumn. The trees were all full of life, not dead. Still, Vidova had an impact on me. She knew something that was about to happen, and somewhere I knew it too. He took another big gulp of his bottomless drink. His skin started to look a little bit red, as if he had a rash or was allergic to something. After the walk, I went to the power plant. I was a part of the night shift that started at 11:04, but it was protocol to be an hour early preparing yourself for the job. After preparations, I walked in the long and lifeless hallway of the power plant, where I saw a man that I had never seen before. It almost seemed as if he was hiding in the shadows, acting and being very suspicious. I walked up to him asking what he was doing. Yuri started to trill as he was talking about his encounter. I looked the man in the face, and the only thing he could do was grin, very sinister. His appearance was unnatural. His face seemed wrong, but I don't know why. His eyes showed me so much hate, as if he wanted to kill me right there. He didn't say anything to me. I looked at his name card. Atamet, it read. I knew right then and there it was a big problem. As I walked away hoping to find someone to report the man, he started to speak. His voice sounded as if Satan himself spoke to an enemy. It was awful, and the only thing he said was, "Goodbye." I could see the red veins in Yuri's eyes as he widened them while he spoke. It was the face of someone seeing a ghost. I asked a few people if they knew a man named Atamet, said Yuri again, speaking with his heavy Russian accent. But nobody ever heard of that name. I wanted to inform the security of this man, but my boss called me and demanded that I had to go to my station. I was already late and he seemed very nervous for some reason. I told my boss what happened, but he didn't care. He was too busy giving commands to everyone. It was strange to see my boss in the control panel. He was one of the 3 senior managers of Chernobyl. They almost never showed up. I sat down next to Akimov, who also looked very nervous and pale. He told me that Reactor 4 was acting strange, like somebody had tampered with it. Wait, hold up. You were actually working when Chernobyl exploded? I asked in disbelief. Chernobyl didn't explode. It was only Reactor 4. But I was in Chernobyl when it happened, he said while drinking another big gulp of his drink. I watched him with eyes wide open. I was talking to a man who had survived Chernobyl while he was working there when the accident had happened. Our boss was commanding us for hours on end. I could see the reactor acting stranger each minute that passed by. We needed the power to go higher again, but it didn't. We all knew something horrible would happen, and eventually, it did. He looked me straight in the eye as he came closer, and I could smell his metal breath again. Reactor 4, a RBMK-type reactor, is made to create 3,200 megawatts of power. At the final stage, it had an output of 30 megawatts. The whole thing was so unstable. I warned my boss, but he wasn't experienced enough to know anything about it. Akimov pushed the AZ5 button to stop the reactor from working, and that's when I heard it. A tremendous explosion, as if we were being attacked by the Americans. Yuri said, almost yelling. But that wasn't the case. It was Reactor 4 who had exploded. My boss started commanding everyone around, blaming Akimov for making this happen. He commanded me to go with a few other people in the room to see what the damage was. I could feel my heart sink into my shoes when he ordered me to do that. We all knew that it would mean death for us if the reactor indeed had exploded. Wait, you didn't go to the reactor now, did you? I acted suspicious. Something all of a sudden didn't feel right at all. Yuri's face became even more red, now looking as if he had had burn marks. His hands showed signs of blisters and a small drip of blood came out of his nose. The first thing I noticed was the strong taste of metal, began Yuri, ignoring my question. My colleagues tasted it too. I could see on their faces that it wasn't a good sign. We walked through the long halls and going up a few stairs. It was clear that there had been a big explosion destroying a large part of the building. Everywhere, there lay debris and it seemed like half the building was on fire. But still, me and my colleagues ventured forth to the reactor, though we all felt sick. Yuri, what's happening with your face? I asked, seeing that he had turned redder than before, and I could see burn marks all over his body. His white clothes showed signs of red blood coming from his body too. It was only one hall away, but the radiation was so much. Do you know that the neutrons coming off the uranium hit you like bullets at almost the speed of light? They kill your organs, your cells. They take out everything. How can you still be alive? We walked closer and closer to the reactor. We knew that the reactor was gone and the core was exposed, but we had to see it to report it. My colleagues, my friends, and my comrades fell one by one as we got closer. The air around us got distorted because of the high levels of radiation. I knew I was dying right there, as my vision became blurrier and my legs couldn't hold me up anymore. That's when I saw something walk out of the reactor hall. That's when I saw Adamet with a big grin on his face, watching us die. And then he started to walk towards me. It wasn't a human. Yuri said as now blood started dripping from his eyes. It was something out of hell, a being that was pure evil. He was now standing in front of me, smiling with his eyes full of hate. He almost touched me, but the lights went out for me, and I never saw daylight again. I looked in horror at Yuri. His face was almost melting off. His skin was gone. He looked awful. No words came out of my mouth, only a squeaking sound of fear. Yuri took his last big gulp of his drink, and then he grabbed my pulse with his terribly burned hand. Take it from me. You cannot escape evil. It will always find you. He said as his voice had changed into something much more sinister, all the while having a big grin on his face and his eyes full of hate looking at me. You know how the official story goes. A safety test gone wrong because of a safety flaw that created a 1-minute gap that could be crucial. and an unprepared team performing the procedure because of a 10-hour delay, leading to instability and a chain reaction of destruction. My dad was already a relatively old man. His 70th birthday would be in a few months. But he always had been one of those people with incredible vitality. So I was pretty sure that he was going to live to 100, maybe outlive me. The cancer on his right lung was sudden and devastating, and he was terminal in a matter of 3 months. Mother begged him to get radiotherapy, and we did try, but that didn't seem to work at all. "I would rather spend my last days at home with an ounce of dignity. Thank you," was his final verdict. And that's what he did, basking in the sun on our small garden every morning, as he constantly coughed up blood. "You know, you're my only beloved son." He always started like this when he meant to say stuff like, "Take care of your mother when I'm gone," or "Lose the long hair." "Grab a chair and sit comfortably. I want to tell you about my time in Ukraine." That was a first. He always acted like his life had started the moment he moved to America and met my mother. And despite being terrified with this story, I'm so glad my dying father shared his secrets with me before passing. I recorded everything, and the following is a transcription of his account, word by word. By the late 70s, all of the higher-ups knew that the Union wouldn't last forever. Dissolution is inevitable in such a large territory. You know what I think. This country won't last forever as one either. And so they started researching ways to soften the fall. Well, son, we had a considerable group of bold scientific minds, futuristic even. There was this man. His name is irrelevant, but he had Brezhnev's utmost trust. He had a bold plan of abolishing work, for regular people anyway. He dreamed of a world where people could dedicate themselves to studying and leisure. But of course, that's impossible without slaves, right? However, he had adventurely than we have in the Western these days. This was no less than 40 years ago, mind you. The government gave him carte blanche to conduct experiments as he pleased. The enemies of Soviet people were sent to his facility, and they became mothers and fathers of human hybrids. I don't know the details, but each person was like a battery, and each animal was like a battery too. They could power a given number of hybrids before they were depleted and they died. What do you mean, human hybrids? I was barely able to keep up with his flow of disturbing information. What animals? Dear Lord, He coughed painfully. Don't interrupt me, son. I don't think I have the time or the proper knowledge to explain it all in detail. And it was really hard mustering up the courage to tell you about it. He created all kinds of human hybrids at first. It was uncanny. That man was a total genius. His laboratory was something out of a science fiction cartoon, with all kinds of machines that I'm sure no one else will ever have. I know what he did was morally questionable, but I still have great respect for him. I think to this day, I still believe it was for the greater good. The sacrifice of hundreds for the creation of thousands, and the happiness of millions. One could say that his creations were artificial life forms because they were born as adults. I mean, they were born with the approximate physical and mental age of their human ancestor. So of course, able-bodied people in their 20s and early 30s were the most desirable subjects. It was easier to dehumanize in this way. Feel no guilt about creating humanoid beings to be the slaves of a society of happiness. But I wouldn't say they were artificial. They needed food, rest, and a sense of purpose, just like everyone else. Is a grape tomato less of a tomato just because it was developed by men? I don't think so. After the initial testing, the brilliant scientists and the political leaders settled on the reptile hybrids. Yes, they needed to be warmed up daily on artificial light that emulated the sun. But they were faster, stronger, and had more energy than the average human soldier, and less setbacks than other hybrids. They also didn't require a lot of sleep or food, and their appearance was great because they were really similar to normal humans, with only small patches of scales in a few places and little to no body hair. Each reptile soldier was unique because they received slightly different features from their human and snake donor. Some had venom, for example. Some were incredibly smart and were promoted as leaders. The scientists' logic was that they'd be more inclined to follow orders if their commander was one of their own. They lived to serve, and they didn't know any other purpose. They were treated like a farmer treats his carriage horse, not cruelly per se, but as a living thing that only exists to do hard jobs. After settling with reptile men, the scientists decided to spend 2 or 3 years only training them with internal chores in governmental facilities all over the URSS. After the incredibly bold move of creating a whole new Homo species, they wanted to play it safe. Things were good. A few weeks prior to the graduation day of the reptile men, they all started being moved to Pripyat. Ukraine was giving signs of wanting to declare independence due to the era of stagnation, so giving all of our soldiers to them was pretty much a peace offering. But something happened. Something minor at first. One of the female reptile men was found to be pregnant with another reptile soldier's child. The doctor knew that this was a possibility, but it was a smaller concern, and it was impossible to keep surveillance to the point of avoiding sexual relations, and so it was never addressed. The fusion of human and snake features made around half of them completely sterile, both males and females, and researchers showed that it was highly unlikely that a pregnancy could be carried to term. Besides, their socialization was contrary to seeking for pleasure. But it happened. Faced with the decision, the doctor made the only mistake of his career, an expensive one. He decided to allow it to happen, eager to study the reptile men's first natural-born offspring. Inevitably, the word about the baby spread among the soldiers, especially after the pregnant soldier was quarantined. At first, they barely knew what it meant, since they never had been babies, never came out of a mother's womb. But then, something very primal and irresistible turned on inside their obedient brains, wreaking havoc and rapidly changing everything they knew. They gained the sense that there's more to life than they had been presented so far, the sense of wanting something better, a bright future for their children. And that resulted in a devastating rebellion. The reptile men escaped en masse, attacking the human soldiers, their oppressors, with the tactics they had been taught to protect their country. Dozens of middle echelon Soviet soldiers were murdered or severely injured by snake poisoning, strangulation, or simply being bitten to death. I was there that day. To me, none of those lives were disposable. The reptile men had a point, but I didn't condone with their violent methods. The person I cared about the most was the doctor. I escaped, carrying him in my arms. You know, I always had been a great sprinter. Could have gone to the Olympics if the circumstances were different. I took the doctor to the safest place I could think of, the power plant. The reptile men couldn't possibly know about it, and even with their numbers and strength, it would take a while to invade such a place. The snake soldiers quickly invaded the city. They had never been hungry and in the wild before. I have no way to describe the bloodshed, but human limbs were like flags, and human blood was like paint on the streets. They were everywhere. They were in everything. You could almost get used to it. It was your brain attempting to keep your sanity. I only watched it in binoculars from afar, and it still gives me night terrors over 30 years later. I can't even understand the hell that it was down there. But still, I believe the reptile men weren't evil. They were simple-minded and lacked discernment. They were part animals and made to be lackeys, after all. Being in charge of themselves must have been scary. And you know what snakes do when they're scared? They pounce and kill. Sorry, I'm getting sidetracked by the haunting memories. The doctor was grateful to me beyond words. He arranged that a car came to pick us up early in the next morning, while the reptile men's cold blood would keep them in dormancy. His goal was to exploit this only weakness and get Russian troops to come for damage control in a few days. Also, early in the morning, while the reptile men would be slow and vulnerable. But it was 1986. And he didn't have carte blanche from Gorbachev. Everyone who could vouch for the doctor was dead. He had majorly screwed up and he was all alone. The night we spent in the Chernobyl power plant was the scariest of my life. Outside in the distance, there was so much screaming, and wherever you looked, you could see thousands of pairs of snake eyes glowing in the dark. No one slept a wink that night. The doctor feared that the international media would find out about his doings and use it as a political weapon. Nuclear energy wasn't his specialty, and so he spent hours asking the power plant workers about the viability of using radiation to kill the reptile men. I think that's when the plan B started to form inside his brain. The doctor wouldn't know that the Soviet government abandoned him until the day after I left. Or at least that's what I concluded. Because the day after I left was the day of the nuclear accident. The doctor died there, protecting the reputation of the URSS. Presidents come and go, but his loyalty was to his people, and I respect him for that. He created the reptile men to serve his people, and created the worst nuclear disaster in history to protect his people. Such a great man. Deep down, I know he cared for the snake soldiers as much as he cared for other humans. Reptile men were his sons, his pride and joy. He made a long pause. I was scared, amazed, and definitely intrigued by this genius my father described with such respect. A man that he had risked his life to save. And so I couldn't resist and decided to ask at least one little question. How can you be so sure?
Because
My dad's eyes gleamed strangely.
he made sure that at least one of us survived.
My name is Adrian, and I'm an investigative journalist from Poland, driven by a thirst for uncovering hidden truths. Chernobyl held a profound significance for me, not only as a haunting scar in history but also due to a personal connection. My grandparents had been affected by the disaster, forced to abandon their home and lives. Inspired by their resilience, I embarked on this journey to capture their stories and unravel the mysteries that shrouded Chernobyl. Filled with trepidation and excitement, I packed my gear ready to confront the demons lurking within its irradiated walls. Little did I know that this expedition would push me into a sinister web of conspiracy, blurring the lines between reality and nightmare, forever changing the course of my life. We were a group of intrepid travelers united by a shared curiosity and a thirst for the unknown. The journey ahead would take us deep into the heart of the Chernobyl exclusion zone, a place shrouded in mystery and haunted by the ghosts of the past. Our guide, Igor, regaled us with tales of the ill-fated Chernobyl disaster, his voice tinged with a mix of reverence and melancholy, painted vivid pictures of a once vibrant city reduced to a post-apocalyptic wasteland. As we approached the border of the exclusion zone, the landscape began to transform. The lush green countryside gave way to desolation and decay, a stark reminder of the event that had unfolded here decades ago. As we drove deeper into the heart of the inclusion zone, a palpable sense of unease had settled over the van. The silence that permeated the air seemed to amplify the weight of the past, the residual energy of lives disrupted and dreams shattered. Through the windows we caught glimpses of abandoned buildings, their crumbling facades standing as a testament to the transience of human existence. It was amidst the eerie silence of Pripyat that my fascination with the strange and unexplained lured me away from the safety of the group. A stray cat, with its radiant blue eyes and matted fur, darted playfully through the remnants of the city, drawing me deeper into the labyrinth of abandoned streets. The curious creature seemed almost otherworldly, an enigmatic guide leading me toward an unseen destiny. As I ventured further into the forgotten alleys of the city, the echoes of my companions faded into oblivion. The weight of solitude settled upon my shoulders, both thrilling and unnerving in its intensity. It was as if I had crossed an invisible threshold, stepping into a realm where time and reality had intertwined, where the boundaries between the living and the departed became blurred. In my solitary exploration, I stumbled upon a hidden path concealed beneath a tangle of ivy and overgrown shrubbery. It beckoned to me, an invitation to uncover secrets long buried in the annals of history. My curiosity overpowered any trepidation, propelling me forward further into the heart of the enigma. The hidden path led me to a dilapidated building, its weathered facade standing defiantly against the ravages of time. The faded sign, barely visible amidst the peeling paint, identified it as Laboratory 23. The air crackled with an aura of mystery as I hesitated at the threshold, my heart pounding. Stepping into the forsaken laboratory, I found myself in a time capsule frozen in a perpetual state of abandonment. Broken glass and discarded equipment littered the floor, remnants of a hasty retreat. The air carried the scent of rust and decay, a haunting perfume that hung heavy in the atmosphere. Amidst the wreckage, my eyes fell upon a collection of documents scattered across the table. Their faded pages held cryptic symbols, enigmatic diagrams that seemed to dance with arcane knowledge. As I traced the lines with my trembling fingers, a sense of foreboding washed over me. It was as if these documents were a portal into a realm of forbidden knowledge, a Pandora's box that held the darkest of secrets. Driven to find out, I delved deeper into the lab's forgotten chambers. Within the dimly lit recesses, I discovered a hidden room, concealed behind a heavy rusted door. The moment that it creaked open, I knew that I had unearthed something unimaginable. The room was lined with shelves, each holding a multitude of binders meticulously labeled with names. As I perused the contents of the binders, a wave of disbelief washed over me. Each name was accompanied by a photograph, a face frozen in time. But it was not the faces themselves that sent a chill down my spine. It was the realization that these were the faces of missing individuals, those that had vanished without a trace from society. One binder in particular caught my attention. It bore the chilling label, Clones. Opening it, I discovered an unsettling truth. The missing individuals had been cloned, their lives replicated in secrecy within the confines of this clandestine laboratory. The implications of such a revelation were staggering, a betrayal of humanity that defied comprehension. The weight of the evidence that I had collected threatened to crush my spirit. The room, suffused with an oppressive aura, seemed to tighten its grip around me. With the photographs and documents securely tucked away in my bag, I turned to leave, determined to escape the clutches of this nightmare. But as I moved toward the exit, a peculiar sensation prickled at the back of my neck, sending shivers down my spine. It was as if the air itself had carried an ominous whisper, a ghostly echo of footsteps echoing through the desolate laboratory. Fear seized me, freezing me in place. The realization dawned upon me like a chilling gust of wind. I wasn't alone in this place. Someone or something else lurked within the shadows, drawing nearer with each passing moment. The excitement of discovery mingled with a growing sense of dread, creating a disorienting cocktail of emotions. In that harrowing instant, instinct took hold, overriding rational thought. Without a moment's hesitation, I pivoted on my heels and bolted towards the exit, my heart pounding in my chest. Panic fueled my every step as I navigated through the dimly lit corridors, the clamor of my own breath and the echoing footfalls of my pursuer, serving as a macabre soundtrack to my escape. Every shadow seemed to shift, morphing into a sinister figure posed to snatch me back into the clutches of the unknown. Adrenaline coursed through my veins, propelling me forward. My only goal was to break free from this labyrinth of horrors. The very air seemed to thicken, as if resisting my frantic escape, but sheer determination fueled my desperate flight. Finally, I burst through the door, gasping for breath, my pulse thundering in my ears. The world outside of the laboratory, though still cloaked in an eerie silence, it felt like salvation. I sprinted through the desolate halls, never looking back, each step propelling me further from the unseen terror that had pursued me. It was only when I had reached the relative safety of the open air, the sun casting long shadows across the abandoned landscape, that I allowed myself a moment to collect my thoughts. Beads of sweat trickled down my forehead as I leaned against a crumbling wall, trying to steady my racing heart. The weight of the encounter pressed upon me, a reminder that the horrors lurking in the unknown were far more menacing than I could have ever imagined. I knew deep down that the discovery I had made in that foreboding laboratory had unleashed something far greater than I had anticipated. It was a truth that demanded to be revealed, but it also posed a danger that threatened to consume me. With trembling hands, I clutched the bag containing the evidence, the only tangible proof of the conspiracy that I had encountered. With renewed determination, I vowed to bring the truth to light, no matter the personal cost. The echoes of footsteps and the ghostly whispers would forever haunt my memory, driving me forward into the heart of darkness, preparing to confront the unimaginable horrors that lay ahead. After all rational judgment, I made the fateful decision to return to the forsaken laboratory, driven by a thirst for the truth that burned deep within my soul. The weight of the knowledge that I had gained hung heavily upon my shoulders, propelling me forward into the heart of danger where few dared to tread. As I cautiously stepped into the decaying lab, the air seemed to grow heavier, pregnant with an otherworldly presence. The soft glow of my flashlight illuminated the desolate scene before me. Each creak of the floorboards echoed like a spectral cry, a warning from the spirits of those whose lives had been extinguished in this place. With renewed determination, I retraced my steps, re-examining the cryptic documents and peculiar biological equipment that had initially captivated my attention. But now, armed with new insights, I saw beyond the surface. I deciphered the symbols etched onto the aged papers, connecting them to knowledge hidden within ancient texts and whispered legends. As I moved further into the chambers, the air became charged with an electric energy, as if the very walls pulsed with the secrets they held. Each room held its own story, its own secrets waiting to be unraveled. I meticulously examined every piece of equipment, every forgotten notebook, uncovering a web of interconnected experiments that went far beyond human cloning. The further that I delved into the lab, the stronger the sensation of being watched became. Paranoia gnawed at the edges of my mind, as if unseen eyes tracked my every move. Shadows seemed to dance in the corners of my vision, fleeting glimpses of a presence that eluded my grasp. The air crackled with a malevolent energy, leaving me on edge, my senses heightened to every flicker of movement and every whisper of sound. Strange occurrences plagued me, testing the limits of my sanity. Objects inexplicably shifted positions as if moved by unseen hands. Whispers, barely audible, resonated through the empty corridors, their messages fueling my determination to find out what happened. Each encounter with the unseen presence left me trembling, yet I pressed forward, compelled by the curiosity mixed with a gnawing dread. With each moment, the veil between the tangible and the intangible seemed to thin, blurring the boundaries of reality. I began to question my own perceptions, wondering if the presence haunting the lab was merely a figment of my imagination or something far worse. It was as if the very walls held the memories of those who had suffered and perished in this place, their specters reaching out from the past to guide or deceive me. Piece by piece, the puzzle began to reveal the true magnitude of the conspiracy that had been woven within the walls of the Chernobyl laboratory. The disaster had been orchestrated, a calculated smokescreen to mask the clandestine operations of human cloning and organ trafficking. The government, intertwined with a powerful and sinister cabal, had exploited the chaos and devastation to carry out their own heinous deeds. Through a network of corrupted scientists and government officials, they had perfected the art of human cloning and creating identical duplicates to fulfill their nefarious agenda. These clones were mere commodities, their lives extinguished to harvest their organs, which were then sold on the black market to the highest bidders. As I pieced together the fragments, my mind reeled with the implications. The very fabric of society had been torn apart, with those in power manipulating the lives of countless individuals for their own gain. But as these shadows of the truth began to coalesce, so did the darkness that had been lurking within the lab. I was confronted by unidentified individuals, their faces concealed behind masks of shadows. I found myself cornered, my heart pounding in my chest. Panic surged through my veins as I fought against overwhelming odds, desperately clinging to the sliver of hope that remained. In my desperation, a blow to the head sent me spiraling into unconsciousness, my fate hanging in the balance. What awaited me on the other side remained a terrifying mystery. As I teetered on the precipice of oblivion, caught between the harsh reality and the realm of nightmares. When I finally regained consciousness, I found myself alone in the eerie lab, the ominous silence enveloping me like a suffocating shroud. As my vision cleared, I realized with a sinking feeling that all the physical evidence that I had painstakingly collected had vanished, leaving behind only blank empty pages and hollow photographs. It was as if the truth itself had been stripped away, erased by an unknown force that sought to bury the secrets that I had uncovered. How could the evidence disappear so mysteriously, I wondered, leaving no trace of the monstrous conspiracy that had threatened the very fabric of humanity? Doubt crept in, whispering insidious questions about my sanity and the validity of my discoveries. But deep down I knew that I had seen the truth, felt its chilling touch, and I couldn't let it be silenced. Drawing upon the last reserves of my strength, I rose from the cold and barren floor. Every muscle ached and every joint protested, but my resolve burned brighter than ever. The forces that sought to bury the truth would not deter me. With a renewed sense of purpose, I vowed to press forward to continue the fight against the darkness that had infiltrated Chernobyl. Steeling myself, I navigated the corridors, my senses on high alert for any signs of danger. The lab had become a graveyard of secrets, its walls bearing silent witness to the atrocities committed within its forsaken halls. As I ventured deeper, I clung to the flickering flame of hope, knowing that the final chapter of this harrowing journey was yet to unfold. With every step that I took, I knew that I was walking a treacherous path, one that could lead to my own demise. But the truth had become my unwavering guide, guiding me through the murky depths of the unknown. As the final pieces of the puzzle fell into place, I prepared myself for the ultimate confrontation. The shadowy figures who had cornered me before would not have the final say. But every shadow seemed to breathe, every creak of the decaying structure echoed like a sinister whisper. The air hung heavy with an oppressive silence, broken only by the sounds of my own ragged breath. Fear gripped my heart, but the urgency to expose the truth propelled me forward. As I neared the exit, a surge of relief mingled with a haunting sense of loss. Leaving behind the laboratory meant stepping into a world forever altered by the knowledge that I knew. The once familiar reality now appeared distorted, as if a veil had been lifted to reveal the sinister undercurrents that flowed beneath the surface. Back to safety, I struggled to find a voice amidst the cacophony of disbelief and dismissals. The physical evidence that I had collected, once concrete proof of the conspiracy, now lay blank and empty. But with that, the world, ensnared in its own illusions and complacency, rejected my claims. Labeled a conspiracy theorist, my words fell on deaf ears. The weight of frustration and isolation threatened to extinguish the flame of truth within me, but I refused to give up. With nowhere else to go, I've decided to share my story with you. To believe it or not to believe it, that's your choice, but now you know the truth. I am a collector of vintage and lost news media. After acquiring a collection of old small-town papers from a tiny library that was shutting down its doors, one piece stuck out to me. It was not dated and faded like the rest of the collection. It looked like it had been bought in that morning. It contained the most unusual subject matter, and I would have passed it off as some work of outsider art, if not for the images contained within, and the unsettling events unfolding in the wake of my attempts to find the source of this article. Perhaps you too, dear reader, will come to believe in the events at Grouse Springs, or maybe you will dismiss it as so many others have. As I had initially, maybe it's easier to continue living as if nothing like this could change our daily life. I fear that it already has. Blast Radius, an investigation into the tragedy and cover-up of Grouse Springs, by Douglas Ray Cleavon, published August 2021. In one afternoon, Grosse Springs, Virginia went from being a sleepy farming town to a place soaked in infamy. It is now spoken almost exclusively in the company of names such as 3 Mile Island, Fukushima, and Chernobyl. Residents across the East Coast remember June 23, 2016 as a day of unique terror, forced to take shelter in Cold War-era bomb shelters, while the rest of the country recalls a fear of threats to our capital city, evacuation, panic. 1,437 lives lost, some with bodies that still haven't been found even years later. 1,437 friends, children, loved ones, gone. The Grosse Springs nuclear plant's official statement claimed that the planet experienced a loss of coolant incident at the hands of some negligent employee who had mistakenly stopped the flow, causing the pipes to burst from heat and the dangerously outdated graphite tips to catch fire and begin a nuclear meltdown. The fire spread rapidly to the town, and due to a delayed warning system, not everyone had time to make it out. All 532 employees of the power plant were killed, as well as 408 first responders and 497 civilians living in Grosse Springs itself. Unfortunately, as the story goes, military assistance stepped in to assure no more radiation spread and that no more lives were lost. Video footage still exists on the internet, taken by survivors returning to salvage belongings of people who had burned in their cars for leaving just seconds too late. Those who didn't make it out of Grosse Springs perished badly. Even those who had survived the initial danger weren't safe, passing weeks later of radiation poisoning, skin sloughing off. Pets and livestock were killed and acres of beautiful Virginia old-growth forest had been razed. Fortunately, as the story goes, the danger will pass. Life will return eventually and forests will grow back. All those who died could not be replaced. Survivors were given a hefty sum of government money to try to build a new life and move on. Many of these survivors of Grosse Springs were reluctant to speak to the media, both civilians and first responders alike. Understandably so. Even years can't do the trauma associated with such a terrible loss of life. Some alleged witnesses, however, claim that the payout was merely to buy their silence. Lead-lined coffins hide bodies very, very well. Viral videos posted on social media before technology began to fail depict scenes of violence not able to be attributed to radiation poisoning or panic. Animals were seen in the days after damaged in ways that seemed closer to genetic defects than the result of injury. Reports of wildlife that had fused or plants that had thrashed and screamed, of figures looming out of fire. A user on the conspiracy forum Truth Seekers going by 98765 in Grosse Springs made a post on March 4th of last year stating, "I was at Grosse Springs. No blue light, no Chernobyl radiation." Followed 5 minutes later by, "No Chernobyl, no water, no burst pipes." The account and subsequently the post were deleted 24 hours later. However, a second account showed up by the name of Grosse Springs Massacre, this time on the popular photo sharing site Instagram, claiming to be 98765 Grosse Springs, sending screen caps to hundreds of users with the original tweets, captioned, "They deleted my account. Anyone who says they saw a regular fire there are lying." The Grosse Springs Massacre account was deleted again 24 hours later. Although this user was likely just buying into conspiracy, there was one factor that made this post notable. The image used as the account's profile picture was from Grosse Springs, the day of the massacre, and it had never been published before. Many groups outright rejected my attempts at contact, and others still were cold, hostile, or otherwise disinterested. Still, I persisted. There was something here, so I ran an advertisement, pooling money to run a campaign. This remained unsuccessful for months, alternating between long periods of silence and pranksters. That was until I received a phone call on my personal phone from a man that I had never spoken to before. He contacted me around 4 in the morning and I answered, blurry-eyed, glasses still tucked away on the nightstand. Cleveland residence. I heard shuffling on the other end of the line before a quiet voice said, Is this Douglas? Yes, to whom am I speaking? My name's Pete Kitts. Saw your ad online a while ago and I could use the money if you still got it. He was so quiet that I could barely hear him, but I was instantly awake, quickly grabbing my glasses and a pen and paper to write down a time and place to meet. Peter J. Kitts, or Pete as he styles himself, is a big guy. Not in stature, but in everything else. Pete has a big laugh, a big personality, big boots, and at the age of 30, a big gambling problem. That's why he contacted me, he said. Well, I was out of rent money for the week since I was down at the tracks all day the Sunday before and, I saved your number just in case I needed something on the side, Petey had explained, as he showed me the paperwork proving that he indeed received his settlement money from the Grouse Springs accident. It's all gone. We ended up meeting at a hotel cafe, neither of us wanting to introduce stories of Grouse Springs to our homes. The idea still felt taboo, as if we would be invoking it at our place of living if we so much as had mentioned it there. I started my tape recorder, setting it between us. Pete Kitts arrived at a local bar owned by a couple who had happened to be out of town on July 23rd, around 7 p.m. the day of the accident. By 9:45 p.m., everyone who remained in the bar was dead. The fire had spread to the town proper, through the thick trees and undergrowth surrounding the power plant, and by 8:12 p.m. beginning to engulf the businesses and homes of the residents of Grouse Springs. Emergency services had begun moving people out as quickly as possible. Kitts himself was rescued by a civilian vehicle, a good Samaritan trying to fit as many people in as possible. Exiting the building, he could see the smoke trailing from the direction of the trees, accompanied by a smell that he described as metallic. I was in this bar, Nailheads right by the corner of 52nd and West, out with my buddies after work. And I'm looking, well, nothing's wrong with looking at the girls, right? As long as I'm not buying drinks from them. And my coworker Dave says to me, why don't you buy that brunette over there a drink? I'm sitting there thinking, man, Angelica would be so pissed if I did that, so I tell him, my girlfriend, she doesn't want me doing that stuff. So then Dave says, oh, so you're letting that little flat chest make decisions for you now. And that upset me, so I was about to say something, but then I noticed. With this, the previously animate Pete set his jaw and looked out the window, like he was struggling not to cry. He furrowed his brows hard and put his hand on his chin. What did you notice, Pete? He swallowed before continuing, voice shaky. I noticed that brunette went real still. Not just like standing still, but real still. She wasn't even breathing. Her hair was frozen too, like somebody had set her on pause right in the middle of dancing. And then there was this bulge in her stomach. It was like she was pregnant, but it hadn't been there before. And I'm staring at her and Dave tries to get my attention before he sees what I'm staring at, and then he's staring at her too. And then her friends notice and they're all screaming and the music cuts off and nobody knows what to do because something is obviously wrong with the chick, but how are you supposed to call an ambulance when you don't even know what's happening to her? And the bulge, it starts moving up, like traveling from her stomach up to her chest, and you could see her bones cracking and her friends are shaking her, trying to get her to unfreeze or wake up or whatever. And they're crying and screaming and Dave just whispers, what the heck, man? So I called 911. Nobody answered. I think that was about the time the rest of the town was going to crap too, so ain't nobody there to answer the phone. But I doubted that it made a difference anyway with what had happened to her. You see, that bulge had just kept on growing up her neck. God, it was so awful. And these hands just came out of her mouth, one grabbing each jaw, and they just peeled her away. All inside out, red everywhere. Her guts spilling all over the floor. Smelled awful too. A few of her friends couldn't keep their stuff down. I wanted to join them. It felt like it was going on forever, her body just opening and opening and opening. And nobody could see what was inside, and I was thinking, crap, it's a face hugger. Now we're all gonna split in half and die. But it was just her, man. Once all the skin and meat was on the floor, it was just that same brunette, covered in red, unfrozen. It was just her, and she was still dancing. As a collector of vintage and lost newspaper media, it is rare that my hobby takes me into the field. Much of my time is spent in small-town museums, estate sales, or antique stores, in pursuit of the truth, finding out if Grouse Springs existed, if Douglas Ray Cleavon was just the construct of a creative project. I found myself in the Appalachian backwood, shovel in hand. Although there was no church and no town, I still somehow managed to find 3 perfect headstones, and along with them 3 bodies. Even to an untrained eye through the state of decay, I could tell that something had gone deeply, terribly wrong. Horrified, I returned them to their rest and went back to my home. That night, I purchased a firearm for the first time in my entire life. You would be wise to do the same. Blast Radius, an investigation into the tragedy and cover-up of Grouse Springs, by Douglas Ray Cleavon. Published August 2021. The story of the woman at the bar left me floored. Nobody could have predicted such a gruesome turn of events, and I left the interview quickly. I had given Kitts the money that I had promised, but internally, I had brushed him off as a grifter. However, this led me down a rabbit hole. How would I verify what had happened that day, outside of eyewitness accounts? This line of thought led me on a short road trip to Manassas, Virginia. Due to the number of casualties resulting from the incident at Grouse Springs, many coroner's offices from across Virginia, Maryland, and D.C. were required to step in and assist in the examination and identification of bodies. Grouse Springs was considered the primary jurisdiction of the Northern Virginia office, so I figured that would be my best starting point. Luckily, it was also my last. The medical examiner herself refused to speak with me, but a young investigator who received my email decided to contact me instead. He asked to only be identified as Cole, as he felt that coming forward may potentially jeopardize his career and his safety. On his lunch break, he slipped into my vehicle, where we had began our interview. He brought a manila folder with a few papers inside, and told me that they were for later. How long have you worked for the office? He kept his gaze forward as he answered the question, but smiled slightly. I've been here for 5 years. Most people leave after 1 or 2, so I guess you could call me a veteran. And what were your experiences in the days following June 23, 2016? I was only an autopsy technician at the time, he said. It was my first year. Talk about an introduction. We were all working 15 and 16-hour days, going nuts so that we could process the amount of decedents that we were receiving. Everybody had to wear one of those big white hazmat suits, which made the actual examination and sampling a huge pain in the butt. It was exhausting. I was terrified of radiation poisoning too. I mean, some of these bodies, man, all burned up, black, down to the bone in some places. And their faces were twisted too. Like whatever had happened to them hurt so bad that they carried it right to the second that they had died. We all had these little devices clipped to our suits called a personal dosimeter. I thought I was lucky when mine didn't indicate any significant exposure to radiation. Towards the end of the fourth day, almost everybody was stressed to the point of breaking. I guess that I was still so green that it was all exciting almost. Like I hadn't been in the business long enough for it to really get under my skin. Yet. So that's how I ended up being pulled into an exam room with the coroner himself. By these two guys in suits that I'm sure were from some 3-letter agency. To this day, I'm still not really sure who they were. Now, when I say that these next bodies had bothered me, that they were strange, I want you to understand that I don't say that lightly. I worked a case one time where the guy just seemed to drop dead in a locked hotel room. Nobody could figure it out until the pathologist noticed a laceration. It turned out some idiot was messing around with a gun in the room underneath him and shot him right in the groin. One night, I had to drive out to the middle of a parking garage to help some guys from the funeral home pick up a body. When I got there, there was a suitcase, just sitting there all stained and dingy. But it stunk that sickly sweet, meaty decay smell, and the guys told me that the decedent was inside. So all 3 of us lifted this thing up, and I guess the body had been in there for a while, and the polyester had just given and gave out along the bottom. The body sloshed out all over us, this nasty and greasy black sludge that had been stewing for who knows how long. I smelled like that suitcase for days. Anyways, my point is, none of that was worse than the 3 bodies that I had to look at. I thought that it was a joke at first. I mean, 2 guys in suits come and tell me to take my hazmat suit off and that I'm needed urgently. It sounded like a prank. But the coroner, God bless his soul, was a serious, old-school type of doctor, and it just wasn't his style. He looked positively grave when he stepped into the exam room, no pun intended. The first decedent was a woman, early 20s, older than I was at the time. Here, he handed me the folder. This is a copy of the autopsy report. I technically shouldn't have this, so be careful with it. She had similar injuries to the other bodies. Burns, suspected shrapnel injuries, that sort of thing. But there were other things. The fingers on her left hand were missing at the second joint, with marks consistent with those of human teeth. On that arm, there were wounds consistent with those of what I thought was a knife. I pointed this out to the coroner, who immediately corrected me. "Not a knife," he said. "Not a knife. These are claw marks." Now, there are a lot of hiking trails out here. Every once in a while, somebody will die out in the woods, and of course, animals will be attracted to them. So it's not uncommon to see a body that had been mauled by something like a black bear, for example. But what bear would be mauling people in the middle of a nuclear meltdown? Another thing, when a decedent has been sitting for a while, the body undergoes something called livor mortis. Once the heart stops pumping blood around, it all just kind of settles at the bottom from gravity. This usually takes a couple of hours, but this body had none of that. It was just all pale. Even the deep and fatty slash marks on the arm were just sitting open. After we finished the examination, we opened her up, and there wasn't any blood, nothing. Not like an injury where somebody bleeds out. It was like she never had any in the first place. Cole was wide-eyed as he recounted this, as if he could hardly believe it himself. I had no doubt that he was telling the truth. What was the body like internally? She was all solid inside. Like her fat and muscle had all turned to soap. We didn't even have time to think about it though, because as soon as we were done with her, we had to move on to the next one. This next decedent was an older guy who looked mostly untouched by whatever was happening at Gross Springs. The only weird thing was how light he was when we moved him onto the table. He wasn't exactly a slender dude or anything, so I almost dropped him on the floor, just because I lifted him with way more heft than I really needed. Visual examination didn't reveal much. No visible injuries, so we were thinking maybe he had died of smoke inhalation or something. Palpitation when you feel to see if there are broken bones or anything, it didn't reveal much either. He just kind of felt spongy. So we started the internal examination. Some parts were there. He had blood and fat and muscle and bones. But we go to check the lungs and they aren't there. No heart, no intestines. I would say about 90% of his organs weren't there. It was upsetting for some reason like the girl had been. It just wasn't right. But the worst part didn't happen until we went to put him back. We pulled out the icebox and sitting in the tray where the body just was, were all of his missing body parts. Perfectly arranged, just like how they would sit if they were inside of him. And they weren't there before. There isn't any logical way that can happen. There just isn't. So I looked towards the guys in the suits and they just order us to open the guy up and put everything back in. And so that's what we did. The last guy, everything started off normal. Or as normal as an autopsy in the wake of a nuclear accident can be, I guess. I was almost relieved, but part of me knew if these guys wanted us to examine him here and now, something was going to be wrong. And there was. The cause of death seemed pretty obvious, due to the extent of injury, but we were told that we needed to remove the brain for sampling. The brain itself seemed normal, but the inside of the skull was hollow, dark. There isn't really a lot of space in there in a regular body, but this guy's skull was shadowed inside like a tunnel. One of the guys in suits handed the coroner a flashlight. The coroner was old guard, the kind of guy who didn't make jokes in the job, the kind of guy who carried a flask filled with scotch around that he would sip regardless of who he thought would see. But when he took that flashlight and looked in that guy's head, he smiled. "Look," he told me. I didn't really see anything, just shadow and a mess of membranes and veins that stretched impossibly on past the beam of light. "Don't you see it?" I didn't see anything. "It's beautiful," he told me. "Here, hold this," he said. He handed me the flashlight and before I could say anything, he put one arm inside of the guy's head up to the elbow. Just looking at it made me feel sick. One time I broke my finger and it ended up at a 90-degree angle, in a way that a limb shouldn't bend. I had to close my eyes not because it hurt too bad or anything, but because I just hated looking at it. It shouldn't have been possible. Watching that man stick his arm in that guy's skull gave me the same pit in my stomach. The coroner wasn't smiling anymore, but his eyes were still all happy and open. He slid in up to his shoulder and it made a nasty sucking sound, and it was like he didn't have a care in the world. Honestly, it was the most relaxed I think he had been in years. I was backing away at this point, but he was waving me over like we were at a dang pool party and he wanted me to get in. Fight or flight response isn't really adequate in a situation where you're panicking. There's another one that people add sometimes, freeze, and that's exactly what I did, as soon as I was out of his reach. Soon his other arm went in and his head and the rest of his body, just into this guy's head. The hole didn't stretch or anything to accommodate him, and he didn't get crushed or anything either. He just went right in. I watched his feet go into this impossible tunnel like he was a cave diver. And then he was gone and I never saw him again. The men in suits ushered me out quickly after that. Ushered is a nice way to put it actually. They basically had to throw me by the seat of my pants because whatever they were saying to me, I just couldn't process it. I didn't even do any kind of cleanup, just a push out of the door and that was that. They told everyone that he had taken his own life, Just couldn't do it anymore from the stress or the alcoholism or whatever. But I know what happened. I was expecting a knock on the door for a few weeks, thinking that some guys would take me away and that I would disappear too. It never happened though. Obviously, I guess they just figured that I wouldn't talk about it, or if I did, nobody would believe me. But I found these records. He thumped the folder with the back of a finger. And I'm talking to you right now. You can keep these if you want. Do whatever with them. I spent a lot of time being afraid, and I still am. But I guess now I'm more afraid of what would happen to those people than being disappeared by some agency. I found out recently that some people from this office were told to exhume the bodies for some reason. But when they opened the coffins, the bodies weren't there. I thanked Cole for his time and he returned to work. I didn't open the folder until I returned to my office, and when I did, it appeared to verify everything that he had said. I was closer to finding out the truth about what had happened at Grosse Springs, but I felt no closer to finding out what the truth might mean. What had caused such bizarre phenomena? Was there really a nuclear meltdown at all? What had killed so many people, and continued to kill people after the event had ended? It was only through a final coincidence, one last stroke of luck, that I was even able to begin to put the pieces together. I woke up to a rain of flesh this morning. Fist-sized chunks of meat fell on my bed, red, sprinkling my blankets and body. Someone does not appreciate that I'm writing this down, sharing my experiences, letting you read the words published by Douglas Ray Cleveland and the brave individuals who helped him bring Grosse Springs to light. This will be my final word to you, dear reader, before I hide myself in some deep place where I may be safe. Take care. Blast Radius, an investigation into the tragedy and cover-up of Grosse Springs, by Douglas Ray Cleveland, published August 2021. I received an envelope in my mailbox the day after I spoke with Cole. It had no address, and when I asked my neighbors, nobody could recall seeing anybody near my home that day. Inside was a typed letter along with a video cassette. The author of the letter included a note that I do not release this video publicly, so her identity is not revealed, but she has permitted me to include screen caps. I watched the video in its entirety and have no doubt of its veracity. The event at Grosse Springs was not a nuclear accident. I will let the letter speak for itself. Mr. Cleveland, Project Skipjack was a power plant, that much is true. The city of Grosse Springs did get its electricity from whatever they were doing down in the bowels of that building known to the public as the Grosse Springs Nuclear Power Plant. It wasn't my job to understand how, though. I was just there to provide security. Keep people out, they told me. Keep people in too if it came to that. I had been on details like this before. They would tell you just enough that you would get a feel for what to do in an emergency. You learned early on not to ask too many questions. Things were bad before June 23rd, but the public didn't know about it. Way back when the power plant had first opened in 2008, a kid went missing from a neighborhood close by. He was only 4 or 5, the same age as my son at the time. Later, sometimes people would see flashing lights in the woods, or cigar-shaped objects hovering in the sky. The higher-ups did a real good job of covering it all up. A scientist had been killed too in the laboratory. I didn't have to work that cleanup, but my buddies who did came back up a bit shell-shocked. One of them requested a transfer, and after that, but it wasn't allowed to happen. He didn't survive the accident. It started in the afternoon, and we were told that's when the technicians would rotate shifts, so we would know to be extra alert. The main lights went off and the emergency light system came on. The alarms didn't start yet, though. They wanted to wait to see if I could get it back under control. This was relayed to me and my partner, and I'll call him Delta, over by radio by the head technician. No worry yet, they said. By the time the fire started, the alarm still hadn't gone off, so we radioed back. But there was no word. Someone I didn't recognize came into the security building and told us that it was code red out there, and the entire security team needed to be deployed to the plant, where the main power core was contained. We weren't told what it was, and just that we needed to help survivors put out the fire, and that under no circumstances could anyone found at the plant leave without checking their identification, even in the middle of a meltdown. If they didn't have ID, we were told to kill them. We got suited up. Our core team was Delta and other people in the detail I'll call Gamma, Beta, and Epsilon. I had body armor, a sidearm, a knife, and a helmet. I was also tasked with keeping record of the accident on behalf of the researchers, so my helmet had a camera. Our fire suppression team went out ahead of us. They were successful in putting the fire out here, so I have no idea how it ended up spreading to the rest of the city. It initially played out like a standard search and rescue. Many of the rooms were hollowed out by the fire, charred black, smoky. It smelled strange though, like somebody had been spraying hair product. There was a lot of searching, but not a lot of rescuing. We cleared about 3 rooms before there was any sign of life. Down the hallway, there was a figure. It was small and it looked like it was coated in dark grease or oil or something. I couldn't tell if it was facing us or facing away because whatever was dripping off of it was so thick that its head was completely obscured. Epsilon called out, "Hey, you there?" But whoever it was, it didn't respond. They just ran off, feet slapping against the floor, down some random hallway. I wanted to pursue, but Delta got me back on track. "Remember," he said over the earpiece, "we gotta get to the core." I nodded and we kept going. There was ambient noise as we got closer, like a crowd of people talking and laughing at a party in a nearby room. Sometimes lights would go on and off in other rooms and we would look and nothing would be there. About halfway down the staircase to the basement level where the core was, one of the walls had burst. A long skinny arm reached through a hole and started groping around with an oversized hand. It was burnt to a crisp. But whatever it was reaching excitedly like a kid, getting the last skittle out of a bag. Gamma and Epsilon fired at it, but they either didn't hit it or didn't care, because it picked Gamma up and it squeezed, before anybody could help. The thing played with his limp body through the hole in the wall, tapping Gamma's feet against the floor and shaking him up and down so his arms were flapping around. And I swear to God, when that hand squeezed him to death, the only thing that came out of Gamma's body was strawberry ice cream. We ran before the rest of whatever the heck that thing was decided that it wanted to grab anybody else too, sprinting down the stairs. Dark splotches were smeared on the wall. Sometimes there was an arm or a leg sticking out. At one point we had passed a human face lodged in the wall, which just wept and wept. I don't remember if it was Epsilon or if it was Delta that put a bullet in its head. The last flight of stairs were too damaged to access, so we had to cross the first floor to find the alternate staircase on the other side of the building. I was hoping maybe we would actually find somebody that we could help, but I was wrong. It sounded like people were having a conversation all around us, not one that made any sense. The voices were cackling, howling, whimpering. The sharp, tangy smell from earlier was becoming overpowering. It felt like somebody was touching the bottom of my boots. Epsilon turned to me to say something, but before he could, his tongue fell out of his mouth and onto the ground. And then his fingers started falling off. His eyes drooped out of his head. He was thrashing and moaning. Blood made the floor slick enough that he slipped and fell. I knew it was Delta that took the shot this time. Epsilon didn't die though. He just kept falling apart all over the floor. Delta and I kept going dutifully forward. Maybe we could stop whatever this was if we just made it there. Noise from Epsilon's collapse must have gotten attention, because back near the entrance to the first floor, a door creaked open. It was so loud that Delta and I turned around to look. It was a woman. She peeked her eyes out from the now open doorway. They were open manically wide, the whites visible even at a distance. She disappeared for a moment and after a pause, slunk out of the doorway. She was grinning or grimacing maybe. It was hard to tell. Her expression wasn't lining up with the sheer unhinged malice she seemed to exude. Shoulders slung low, head facing up. I could tell that if she got her hands on us, and that would be it. It was me. It couldn't be me, but it was. She wasn't wearing any clothes, and every mole on my body, every crease in my skin, even my C-section scar, were all perfectly mirrored on hers. Slowly she approached. Behind her, it seemed like she left a shadow. It was solid almost. A faint afterimage doubled over where she had just been. She waved when she saw us staring. We were in shock. That's the only way I could justify it to myself when Delta waved back. The woman went into a sprint, running towards us at a speed that I've never been capable of achieving. I fired my sidearm and saw that I had shot her straight through the forehead. She stopped for a moment, a line of afterimages slinging back behind her, before they snapped together and she was left wholly unharmed. We just had to beat her to the stairs. We just had to get to the core. Delta and I turned and started moving as fast as we could towards the staircase, but she got closer and closer, and I could tell that she was laughing through her clenched teeth. Right at the staircase, she was on us. I looked and she was there, and I could feel her hot breath on my neck. I didn't realize I was doing it, but my feet were still moving, taking me down towards the basement. She was tearing apart Delta with her teeth. He didn't even scream, just looked at me like big eyes like he didn't know what was going on, as she pulled loop after loop of intestines out of his torso. The basement was horrible. Bodies swung on hooks from the ceiling. Some animals were alive, dragging itself on the ground while it bleated pathetically. I moved down from the catwalk to the floor where the animal scooted past me before sinking into the floor. Charcoal bodies hung suspended in the air like they were held by an invisible string. Some of them were reaching out and grasping for help, and some were curled up, comforting themselves. Towards the middle of the room sat 4 giant batteries sticking out from the floor. There were 4 of them, all inscribed with some language that I didn't even recognize. Connected by cords, there was a seat between them all. It resembled an electric chair with a helmet and restraint straps, but the restraints had clearly been snapped. I was taking this all in when I heard the woman come into the basement. There was nothing that I could do. Whatever had done this, I couldn't stop it. I couldn't even begin to comprehend it. I took a deep breath before running to hide. There were pipes everywhere, and I tried to find some that made a corner small. I contorted my body and compressed myself down into the fetal position. Tears streamed down my face, but I was silent. My son would wonder why Mommy didn't come home. Or maybe she would come home and it would be whatever the heck had just taken out Delta. "Found you," she whispered. It felt like 4 hands were scratching me and digging into my skin, tearing through my clothes and ripping chunks out of my body. And then it felt like 6 hands, 12 hands, 8 hands. I was kicking and screaming, too panicked to do anything other than try to protect my face. She was laughing and it sounded like a room full of people laughing. Maybe I started laughing, I don't know. My eyes were screwed shut and I could tell that I was bleeding and I just wanted it to be over. But something made her stop. She pulled away from me and I felt a cold little hand in my face. It was filmy and greasy, but I leaned into the relief the coolness provided and sobbed. It pulled away. I heard wet footsteps walk away from me. And then I was standing at the entrance to the power plant. It was the next day and I was covered in red and some black substance that reeked like garbage, but I was alive. I collapsed on the ground and I radioed for assistance. I was given a significant amount of cash into medical retirement. The first thing that I did with my newfound wealth was buy a house on the West Coast and get the heck out of there. Whatever was in that power plant, whatever force had killed all those people, it was still out there as far as I knew. Nobody stopped it that day. The incident at Grouse Springs only ended because it wanted to end. Do you understand that? I told my employers that my camera broke. I'm not sure why they believed me, but they did. I kept the cassette. At the time, I wasn't sure why, but now I realize. I need people to know what happened. Good luck. In the early 1940s, the U.S. State Department along with the Army deliberately infected prisoners in Illinois with malaria in hopes of studying the effects on the human body. In 1943, the U.S. government conducted what is known as the Philadelphia experiment, using unified fuel theory in the effort to make a ship completely undetectable. This ended poorly and many sailors aboard were left with PTSD as a result, and one man lost his hand. Following this, the U.S. government continued experimenting with magnetic fields in Project Montauk using the underprivileged as test subjects. In 1950, the U.S. Navy sprayed an allegedly harmless bacteria over San Francisco in an event called Operation Sea Spray. It turned out the disease caused pneumonia-like symptoms and many people became ill. Between 1960 and 1971, the Department of Defense paid to irradiate cancer patients to record data on how high levels of radiation affect the human body. These are just a handful of examples the United States government has experimented on its own citizens, which were only revealed through the Freedom of Information Act. It is likely that there have been countless more times the United States has subjected civilians to unethical scientific research well into the modern day. I believe that the alleged paraphysical force powering the city of Grosse Springs was one of these times, resulting in one of the most dangerous industrial accidents of all time. Information on Project Skipjack needs to be publicly released. The government needs to be held accountable for this tragedy. It is unacceptable to subject an entire town to understudied, highly lethal physical forces, and it is time for this matter held secret and the dark to come into light. We, the citizens of the United States of America, demand honesty. As a collector of newspapers, I have a vast collection of articles on missing persons. I'm not sure if it's a coincidence that a young boy went missing here in our world in 2008, in the neighborhood located near the woods in which I found the bodies that Cole described as vanishing. I have been seeing lights recently near my home. In my dreams, I see her face laughing at me. She's saying something, but I cannot understand. Douglas Ray Cleavon's diligent research and commitment to the truth is commendable. However, in his analysis of the events at Grosse Springs, I believe he made a grave mistake. This could not be dismissed as an industrial accident. The Philadelphia experiment, Project Montauk, the testing on American civilians conducted in the past, these events weren't about discovering new power sources. They were about developing a weapon